Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto finds his parents scrolls part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. On a late October day, a crack of sunlight peered its way through a shade-covered window set within the stone walls of an imposing tower that stood at the center of a bustling village lit by the orange glow of a fall sun as it sank across the horizon. As that last trails of light pushed through the window, they fell upon a blond man relaxed in his chair facing a worn wooden desk, his body lax as he looked out towards his dimly lit office. As the light traveled across the worn wood of the desk, skipping over unopened scrolls and the discarded bits of quill and paper, it came to rest glinting slightly on a pair of china saucers and a photo that sat before them as if the frame itself was to enjoy their presence. Even as the light dimmed, the last vestiges of it glinted upon the frame housing the image of an old smiling man staring out defiantly from the glass, holding a peace sign as he flashed his eternal smile to the blonde before him. Sitting across from the still image, the blonde man remained motionless as his eyes drifted across the photo, his mind casting into the stream of his memory as he found a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Flashback. "Minato, my boy, that hat sure suits you," chuckled an elderly man draped in a set of older white robes, his crinkled face turning up in a smile, as he watched his successor place the Hokage hat upon his head and take his first seat behind what had long been his own desk. "Of course it does, sensei. Can I teach them or what?" laughed a white-haired man dressed like a kabuki actor, swelling with pride at seeing his student succeed in his dream thanks to his guidance. "Well, I did some of the work, Jiraiya-sensei," chuckled the blond man as he adjusted the brim of the hat now sitting atop his head so that the red emblem of fire faced towards the pair before him. As the three men chuckled, Minato could not help but smile back at his own inauguration a few hours before as he took his first sit in the Hokage office with his predecessor and sensei looking over him. The blonde Hokage simply sat smiling at the two, basking in the realization that at long last he had accomplished the dream he had held since childhood. Turning his head slightly, he set his gaze out over the village resting below his new perch, his village. As he looked out, he felt a small pressure on his chest as his eyes tracked out over his home, pride, hope, and most of all love, fighting for dominance, as he looked upon the scattered rooftops and the small moving shapes that made of the people he had sworn to protect. Then and there he swore to himself that he would follow in the footsteps of the other Hokage and protect his home from any danger, no matter the cost to himself. As Minato gazed out on the village, the third Hokage watched his successor, a small smile upon his lips as he felt a growing pride at the man who would be carrying on his duty from that day on. Sighing to himself, the third cast his mind back over his time in the office. He had carried the village through the slog of war, the glory of victory, and the simply calm of peace, but now, at long last, he was passing on the will of fire to the next generation. A small tear formed on the corners of his eyes as he saw himself all those long years ago first taking the Hokage hat, the look of pride on his sensei's face at the time even as his own lit up, smiling just as Minato's did now. And at long last it was his turn to watch the torch pass on. Turning slightly, he looked at his student, the Toad Sage, and couldn't help but chuckle at the expression playing across the man's face. Jiraiya had never been one for sultry, so while the old third and new fourth Hokage allowed this moment to wash over them with small warm expression, Jiraiya had elected to sport a pair of waterfalls that fell from both eyes, muttering how proud he was that his student had made it this far, his words barely audible as he tried to rub away his tear with one red sleeve. "I always knew you had it in you, you blonde gaki sniff," the old sage managed between his continued happy sobs. Turning around at the sound, Minato could not help but burst into a wide grin looking at his old sensei's expression, rising from his chair as he made his way slowly towards the man. "Come on, Ero-sensei, this isn't a time to be crying. Wouldn't want all those beautiful women to see the gallant Jiraiya in such a state, would we?" chuckled Minato as he clapped a hand upon the sage's back, causing him to halt his sobbing for a moment. This seemed to snap Jiraiya out of his stoop as he blinked up at Minato for a moment before smiling widely before striking a triumphant pose in the center of the office. "You're right, Gaki. I, Jiraiya the gallant Toad Sage, am now the teacher of the fourth and soon to be greatest Hokage the leaf has ever known. The ladies won't be able to resist me," shouted the white-haired man even as a perverted smile spread across his face. At the sight of Jiraiya's perverted smile, Minato and Sarutobi could only shake their heads before as Minato slung his arm around Jiraiya's shoulder, smiling so brightly his face seemed to glow. "Well, come on then, Ero-sensei, I have a date with the most beautiful girl in the village, and it's a time of celebration." The blonde laughed as he glanced around to the other member of the trio. "You coming, Sarutobi?" called Minato as he and Jiraiya moved slowly towards the door, the blonde glancing back to see the third standing silently before the old desk, one hand lying upon the worn wood while looking into the photos of the previous Hokages that hung above the window with a small smile upon his lips as he traced each image. As he turned to face the two men, his smile slowly grew to match the pair's own as he looked upon the future of his village with pride. Yes, Minato, I'm coming. I wouldn't want to keep Kushina and my wife waiting, replied the third as he turned from the desk, starting forwards towards the pair, only to stop dead as he came to a sudden realization. The other two noticed this change and stopped their merrymaking to gaze questioningly at the third, who had gone completely rigid. Hey, old man / sensei, are you alright? They questioned, in unison as they looked at the seemingly frozen man. As they watched, the smile Sarutobi had adopted grew steadily larger and larger, until it appeared to cover his whole face. As Minato and Jiraiya watched, they would have sworn that a younger man had been standing in the office that day, so full of life and happiness was Sarutobi, as a glorious thought took root in his mind. Then, without warning, the old man bursting into the loudest and happiest laugh that the two had ever heard from him, the sound echoing around the office, seeming to only grow louder every moment as it ricocheted off of every surface. No, ha 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 ha, pap pa pa, ha 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 ha, frehh. I ha ha ha, I'm free, laughed the old man as he threw up his hands as thought he was proclaiming to the heavens themselves of his great victory. Sensei, did Sarutobi just go crazy? Questioned Minato, glancing around to his sensei, who looked just as lost as his student at the old man's apparent breakdown. I have no idea, Gaki, responded Jiraiya as he continued to watch his sensei cheer for a moment longer. Hey sensei, snap out of it, shouted Jiraiya as he waved towards the man who didn't seem to notice him. For a full minute afterwards the third continued to laugh, barely able to speak, only sputtering the occasional word out here and there as the pair looked only completely lost as to the cause of this episode. It kind of sounded like he said no more paperwork, but why would he say that? Asked Minato after a few moments of listening to the old man's howling. At this both turned to each other before remembering all of the years they had watched the third wage his seemingly unending war against what he had always said was his greatest foe. Then as the pieces fell into place the pair found themselves joining in the laughter themselves, at the old man's last victory as Hokage. Yes, the third Hokage, student of the first and second, had finally surpassed his predecessors in outlasting the evil that was paperwork. For a time the three continued to laugh and joke before finally gaining enough control to head out to the celebration. But not before Minato had insisted on the photo to commemorate Sarutobi's greatest victory. Flashback end. So 2 years after that happy memory, Minato sat alone in his office, his eyes tracing across the photo he had insisted on taking that day, dropping his gaze slowly to the sake dishes sat between him and the smiling face of Sarutobi. Looking at the old photo, he could only think how happy they had all been then, remembering how Kushina had hit him over the head when the three arrived late, and how Jiraiya had been thrown through a wall by Tsunade when he had tried to flirt with the waitress. It seemed like so long ago now. If only those days could have continued on, but as his memories continued to swim slowly past him, those bright days slowly shifted till arriving at the darkest night of his life. Flashback. That night under the mid-October moon, Minato found himself standing beside his wife within a hidden cave, lit only by the fiery illumination of touchlight that they were using to safeguard the birth of their children. Covering the walls and table were a practical sea of seals meant to hold the beast that dwelt within the woman at bay as she gave life to the struggling forms still nestled within her belly. Though at the moment Kushina was quite intent on ridding herself of that particular burden. Minato, I'm going to kill you for doing this to me, screamed Kushina as she continued to contract her face, grimacing as flashes of pain flashed across her sweating brow. Come on honey, you're almost there, you'll be fine, whimpered Minato even as the bones in his hand cracked under the redhead's grip. His face turned up in worry at the sight of his wife in pain before him. Don't you honey me, Mr. Hokage, I better get all the ramen for this, she screamed out again as the contractions picked up, cutting her words off to be replaced by her labored breathing. The absurdity of the last comment causing Minato to momentarily sweat drop. Only his wife could be thinking of ramen at a time like this. However, before the blonde could give further thought to the matter, his attention was turned around as Sarutobi's wife moved forwards to help receive the first child that was slowly pushing out at that very moment. The birthing was longer than he would have thought possible as each child came one by one, but after what seemed like an eternity, Minato was looking down at three beautiful faces all scrunched up and crying. As he looked down at his newborn children, tears found themselves spilling from his eyes, as he waked over with the third's wife, holding the children up for Kushina to see her own face still stretched with exhaustion lit up in a beautiful smile as she gazed upon her children's small forms. Even as Kushina slowly reached out towards her children's small forms, Minato moved forwards to aid in holding the demon sealed within Kushina at bay, lest the great nine-tailed kitsune seize the opportunity to escape its prison. That moment of relief was when everything had gone so terribly wrong. As Minato had moved forwards, a man in a spiral mask had appeared seemingly from nowhere, slaying Sarutobi's wife with a single slash, spattering the stone floor with a crimson stain as he reached out to seize the still sobbing bundles of his daughters from her quickly cooling corpse. Even as Biwako's body fell, the man had swung his still bloodied kunai to the babies' throats, and demanded Kushina's life in exchange. Minato had engaged the man in a desperate battle, and had managed to save his newborn children, but at a cost. The man had managed to tear the demon from his wife as they battled. The Kyuubi had been released and was now attacking the village, his village. On the front lines, ninjas desperately tried to hold the beast at bay, throwing their lives towards the kitsune in a desperate hope to buy a few more precious moments for their loved ones to escape the demon's wrath. Meanwhile, within a secluded safe house, Minato had managed to retrieve Kushina was now leaning over his wife as he gazed out the window, even as the distant sounds of carnage steadily drawing nearer. As his eyes trailed down to his new family, he felt an odd calm wash over him as he prepared himself for what he knew was his duty. He could not let the beast take them, he would not let it take his village, and he would never let it take anything from him while he still drew breath. Minato, Kushina whispered as she gazed up into her husband's face, even as he said it into a look of determination, the fear in her voice noticeable even through the pain and exhaustion that racked her body after having the beast torn from her. Minato. She managed again, drawing the blonde's eyes to her as she struggled to speak. What are we going to do, the Kyuubi? We can't let it hurt them. She whispered, her voice fading slightly as she clutched her 3 babies closer to her bosom, each letting out small whimpers as the distant roar of the Kyuubi rumbled across the land. Don't worry, Kushina, I won't let it hurt them, I promise. He whispered. He slowly moved towards her, his tone setting off small warning bells within her mind even as she felt Minato's lips upon her forehead, and his hands pulling the 3 bundles from her arms as he rose. What are yo? Was all she was able to say as he disappeared in a yellow flash, leaving her alone, her arms now empty, as she felt a growing horror building in her chest. Minato! She called as the realization of what he was doing, and what it would cost, began to set in for her even as her voice rose. What strength she can, pushing out in a cry of fear for the lives of her loved ones. No, Minato, not them, not you, and oh! She screamed, even as her husband raced towards his death. A moment after his departure from his wife, Minato arrived on the battlefield, within a flash of yellow light, landing beside his old sensei and the third, both panting from their continued attempts to hold back the Kyuubi. Minato? They shouted as the blonde arrived, their eyes immediately drawn to the 3 struggling bundles he had clutched against his chest before shifting back to the young Hokage, confusion evident upon their faces. Gaki, what are you doing bringing them here? This isn't a good time for bring your kids to work day. The Toad Sage joked, called, taking a second to crack a joke despite the desperate situation. Not replying to his sensei's jib, Minato turned to face the 2, his gaze telling them in a moment that he stood ready to make the ultimate sacrifice that night. At this realization, both suddenly felt like a bucket of ice water had been dumped down their backs as their thoughts came to settle on the only reason for the children's presence, and the haunted look now evident upon the blonde's brow. The Fuinjustu, Shiki Fujin, they both thought at the same time. Gaki, no, you can't do this! Yelled Jiraiya, taking a step towards the 4th, desperate to talk his student out of this. I'm sorry, sensei, but it's the only way. If I do this, at least the fox won't be able to take anything else from me, and they. At this point he looked down upon the faces of his children, a soft smile touching his lips. At least they will be safe, he finished in a determined tone. And oh Gaki, there has to be another way. We can think of something, we just need a little time, pleaded the Toad Sage. Time, growled Minato as he turned to his sensei. Time is something we don't have. Every second is being paid with by the blood of our village, my village. If my death can stop that flow, I will jump into the jaws of the Shinigami himself. Minato shouted back, his voice causing the babes in his arms to suddenly begin to struggle slightly against his chest as the little face of his son let out another loud cry. Jiraiya! Spoke the 3rd, cutting off the sage's retort before it could begin. He is right, whispered the 3rd, his words causing the sage to spin around to face him, looking horrified at his old sensei's words. This is what it means to be Hokage, this is what it means to be prepared to give your life for the sake of the village, and this is why Minato was the right choice for Hokage. Continued the 3rd as he slowly approached Minato even as the roar of the Kyuubi drew steadily closer. But sensei, managed the white-haired man as he watched the aged Hokage pass him by as he slowly moved to stand before Minato. As Sarutobi approached, Minato found his eyes drifting down to the crying face of his son as he raised one hand to lightly caress the boy's cheek in an attempt to quiet him, silently thanking the 3rd for understanding what had to be done as he looked upon his children for what could be his last time. That moment, however, was all the aged man needed as he disappeared in a burst of speed, appearing behind the young Hokage, and with a swift chop to the neck, rendered him unconscious. Before Minato's body had reached the forest floor, Sarutobi had moved yet again, gathering the 3 children in his arms, and turned to his student, who looked on in shock. Jiraiya! The 3rd shouted, causing the Toad Sage to turn away from his fallen student to his teacher. Look after the Hokage, And here he paused, his eyes drifting slowly across the treetops to where the barest hint of the village could be made out, illuminated in the raging flames around it. Look after the village for an old man, will you? He finished, a look of peace overcoming his face as he watched his student looking unbelieving at him. But sensei, you can't. Jiraiya began, only to fall silent as Sarutobi shook his head slightly. The ghost of the sensei he had been seeming to fall around him as he lectured his student for one last time. Jiraiya, I told you a long time ago what it meant to be a shinobi of Konoha. The old man said, looking back at Jiraiya with that same look of peace upon his face as he slowly turned away from his student. Besides, the third called, cracking a small smile as he continued, I think beating both paperwork and the kyubi will make me welcome when I see my senseis tonight. After all, I can't keep Biwaka waiting for me. Finished the old man with a smile even as he vanished towards the raging kyubi, leaving the pair alone in the clearing as the roars of the kyubi thundered across the land, the drums to the final march of a true shinobi. Jiraiya could only fall to his knees looking down at the form of his student lying unconscious before him. Even as the roaring of the kyubi grew and Jiraiya heard and saw the explosions and seal arrays that signaled the final battle of his teacher, he could only remember back to his first days as a student with the third. CS. Sensei, what the idea of the will of fire that you keep talking about? Asked a young Jiraiya as he sat tied to training post, blinking up towards where his sensei stood looking down at him. Pushing what strength remained in his aged form, Sarutobi dashed forward, breaking out of the forest edge as he turned to face the rampaging kyubi, a blast of smoke obscuring him for a moment before his oldest partner, the great Monkey King Enma, was falling into step beside him. As the two rushed ahead, another blast of smoke erupted before the charging man was suddenly amongst a field of identical figures, all now sporting great staffs that they lowered to face the great kitsune that swiveled to face them. The will of fire. Well, that is something my senseis passed down to me when I became a shinobi of this village. Honestly, what do they teach you kids in the academy these days? Replied Sarutobi, putting on hand to his chin as his eyes drifted momentarily from the bound boy who looked annoyed at being suddenly ignored. With a monstrous roar, the massive kitsune rushed towards the approaching storm of Sarutobi's enormous claws, fangs and tails coming to bear upon the army before him that answer his roar with one of their own, a last valiant battle cry that echoed out through the night as the elements themselves hurtled one after another, covering the skies in flashes of flame and electricity beside the dull force of water and earth, all cast against the beast's ferocity. Well, how to put this? You see, the will of fire is what makes us able to protect those we care about. It's that strength that only comes when defending those you care for. It's because I care about the people of the village that I'm able to protect them all. They are my strength. Smiled the third as Jiraiya blinked up at him, obviously confused. As the storm of elements crashed upon the great kitsune, the beast seemed to ignore them as it barreled ahead, roaring as it swiped its massive tails back and forth, scattering all that came into contact with them, even as its claws and fangs tore still more of the army before it. At the same time, Sarutobi turned to four of his clones, handing off the three children, trusting them to handle the ritual as he turned to buy them what time he could. But sensei, how does that make you strong? I mean, aren't we just paid to protect people? Besides, everyone protects their home. What makes us different? Questioned the boy, obviously lost as above him Sarutobi let out a small chuckle, shaking his head from side to side. Sarutobi hurled himself aside as the massive jaws of the kyubi snapped down towards him, swinging the massive bow staff, that was his partner, into the beast's jaw even as its tails lashed towards him. Swiveling its enraged eyes to focus on the source of this new kyubi, brought one massive paw around, claws bared, to smash this incest that dare oppose him flat. Just as Sarutobi managed to avoid another crushing tail of the beast, a shadow fell over him, causing him to spin in time to see a paw, the size of a building, descending upon him. The next moment, with an earth-shaking impact, the kyubi felt its paw crushing into the forest floor as a fierce grin to spread across its face. That is true, Gaki. Sometimes we are simply hired to do jobs for others, but let me ask you this, if you're out on a mission, won't you be with your team? Smiled the third, causing the boy to look up at his sensei before nodding slowly as the old man smiled. You see, our home isn't just this village, Gaki, it's the people, our comrades. As long as you are a member of this village, you will always be with the will of fire. Smiled the third as the young boy blinked up at him, still looking puzzled at the old man's words. Before the great kitsune could celebrate smashing the annoying fly, his smile faltered as a sudden pain erupted from his paw. A moment before the end of one massive bow staff burst through its fur, rocketing skywards through his very paw, staking it to the ground. As the staff continued to rise, the enraged kitsune's eyes turned up to spot the accursed man running up its side, going through hand signs as he went. Upon becoming level with the kyubi's face, the man sprung from the pole towards the beast's face even as it brought its other paw to swat the pole from its paw. You see, Jiraiya, as long as we have people to protect, we have the will of fire, and by protecting them they inherit that will and carry it to the next generation, so our flame will always be passed down. Smiled the old man. Itsutsuryu Airship bellowed the third as he became level with the kitsune's head, spitting out streams of earth, fire, wind, water, and thunder towards the beast. Each of the steams forming into a separate dragon which crashed into the beast, slamming it into the ground, even as those remaining shadow clones began to slam bow staffs through the beast's tails, desperate to hold it for even a moment longer. Meanwhile, across the field, the 4 clones had finished the preparations as the 3 children clung together on a small shrine as around them the clones began flying through the hand signs to call forth the ritual. "Filthy ape!" roared the Kyubi as it struggled against its new bindings. "You think you can hold me?" spat the kitsune as its tails began to rip the bow staffs away from its body, the remaining clones falling one by one as the beast freed itself. "I burn you village to ash, and use its people to kindle the thirst of my vengeance, monkey!" roared the Kyubi as it continued to surge forwards. However, the third was not listening to the beast. He had used the momentary opening to rush to the ceiling altar to complete the ritual. Skidding in front of the altar, he suddenly found his legs weakening as he fell to his knees, coughing up blood as he did. "Guess this old body of mine just isn't going to be enough for much longer," managed Sarutobi as he looked back to the Kyubi even as it began to break free from its cage. As the clones finished their work, a sudden cold power radiated across the clearing as the Shinigami himself appeared, glowing faintly in all his horrible magnificence, dropping to hover slightly behind the aged Hokage. At the same moment, the seals around the altar began to glow, attracting the attention of the Kyubi, and unbeknownst to those present, something else that looked on from the heavens. "And even if we lose someone important to us, their death sparks a light for others to protect those who care about one another. That is the will of fire," finished the third as he looked down at his student, who still didn't look convinced. As the kitsune watched, a ghostly hand suddenly emerged from the old man, plunging into his being as pain the likes of which he had never known slowly ripped him apart, his roars echoing out across the forest. As the broken parts of the Kyubi were pulled towards the infants by the Shinigami, a swirling seal appeared on 2 of the children. As each began to absorb the Kyubi, the beast slowly drawn into each. Even as the last bits of the fox began to fade into the 2 little girls, Sarutobi noticed a small seal appearing on the only boy of the 3, a seal he did not create. As his vision blurred, he saw a small tree-like tattoo appear for a moment on the boy's forehead, before fading. The time for wondering, however, was over. His time was over. Looking back towards the village, he could just make out the faces on the Hokage monument even as the light of his eyes began to fade. "So Jiraiya, does that make sense now?" asked Sarutobi as he bent to untie the boy from the training pole. And with a smile on his face, Sarutobi, the 3rd Hokage, the professor god of shinobi, knelt down at the scene of his greatest victory, smiling towards the village he loved, and the faces of his masters he knew he had pleased. "I still don't quite get it," replied Jiraiya, a shrug causing his sensei to chuckle slightly to himself. "Well, that's okay, Gaki, you'll understand someday," smiled the third. "CS." And as the kitsune slowly faded from sight, Jiraiya sat kneeling before his student, his eyes fixed upon the horizon where his sensei's final lesson had finally managed to pound its way through his thick skull, his mouth twitching up in a smile even as tears began to spill from his eyes at the knowledge of what this final lesson had cost his sensei. Flashback end. As Minato remembered that night, his thoughts turned to his own part, how he had awakened only in time to help find Sarutobi already dead, his children beside the man on an altar, 2 having the Shinigami seal still glowing slightly upon them as the 3 had moved to hold tight to one another, trying to stay warm in the cool night air. Minato couldn't help but smile, remembering how Kushina had first burst into happy tears when he had returned with all 3 of their children, and then proceeded to beat him into the ground while crying, yelling about worrying her so much. He chuckled, remembering that following this Kushina had collapsed on him, crying into his shirt and telling him never to leave her like that again. The days following the attack had been tough for the village. Besides the physical damage, the spirit itself had been wounded with the loss of so many. The dead were located and honored. A massive ceremony was held to honor both them and the third for their sacrifice to the village. Minato had announced to the council that his 2 daughters had become the new Jinchuriki for the Kyubi, explaining the events of that night. While some were at first scared of the children, Minato's assurances finally won the council over, and his daughters were celebrated as heroes for helping the third to save them from the raging kitsune. Shaking himself from these memories, Minato's gaze slowly returned to the photo before him as he let out a small sigh. Smiling slightly, Minato raised his hand to cup one of the sake dishes, raising it towards the photo of the thirds, offering another thank you to the man, who 1 year ago to this day had saved both his family and his village. After finishing the drink, Minato proceeded home to celebrate along with his family the life they had been given this day. Time skip. We return to the Leaf Village some 4 years later. During this time, the village had been able to rebuild itself from the Kyubi attack, and was well on its way towards a complete restoration. The memories of that horrible night slowly fading into history as Konoha marched into its future. Meanwhile, in the Namikaze home, most of the family was happily preparing for dinner, or at least attempting to. Naruto Namikaze, the oldest and only son, was bouncing up and down in his chair, excited for his dad to get home, barely able to contain his excitement as he looked around the room as if expecting the man to pop out from under one of the chairs scattered around the large circular table that served as the centerpiece to the kitchen. The young child's grinning face was just like his mother's, but everything else was a complete mix of his parents'. His eyes were a blend of both the violet of his mother and the azure blue of his father, so that they carried a look not unlike a sea at sunset. Meanwhile, his hair had chosen a bright blonde mop just like his dad's. As he looked around, his blended eyes met the bright blue of the second oldest child that stood opposite him. Naruto also bouncing around awaiting the return of their father, her blonde hair waving behind her pulled back into a single ponytail that draped down the side of her head, while her blue eyes darted around just as her brother's did, a wide smile playing across her whiskered face which carried the same smooth curves of her mother's, and her personality happened to be similar as well. As the two children continued to bounce excitedly, their matching red and white Uzumaki shirts waving around them, their constant movement drew the attention of the final child. Standing over by the skink, the youngest of the triplets, Minami, stood in stark contrast to the other two, starting with her fiery red hair that was drawn back so that it cascaded down her back, becoming two pigtails mirrored after he godmother Tsunade. Her eyes as well were different, carrying a deep red, almost brown color that gave her a powerful presence exemplified by her slightly sharper face like that of her father. Unlike her two siblings, she was offering help to their mother, while every once in a while looking at her siblings with a sad little smile and a shake of her head as though she was looking at much younger children instead of her older siblings. Meanwhile, the three's mother Kushina was currently standing over an oven working to get their dinner ready for when Minato arrived, a happy smile upon her lips as she listened to the excited chatter of her children. The previous Jinchuriki had not changed much over the past 5 years, still easily identified by her long red hair, her round happy face, and warm violet eyes. Thanks to the timely arrival of Tsunade, she had recovered from the events 5 years ago, and had been able to look after her family ever since. At present she was dressed in a simply green and white dress that allowed for her protruding belly to be accommodated. It seemed, despite her statements that night, Kushina had not been too opposed to bringing another little one into the world, and at present her family couldn't be more excited to meet its newest member. "Here you go, Minami, put these on the table for me," Kushina said as she handed a few plates to her daughter, who turned up to her mother, red eyes meeting violet as she nodded. "Hi, cousin," smiled Minami, taking the dish from the taller redhead and turning to face her siblings still bouncing up and down at the table. "You know," she called towards the pair, momentarily drawing their attention to their motto, "you two could help cousin and me with dinner, it's not like you're doing anything," finished the redhead as she marched over towards the table. As she moved, the two blondes turned towards their motto, both sporting fox grins, and jumped up to help her out. From behind them, Kushina could only look on as the children started to set the table, idly placing on hand lovingly over her belly and the new life within it. When Minato had first told her that her two daughters were holding the fox, she had been horribly worried about how the village would react, but thanks to her husband, most had seen them for the heroes they were. Meanwhile, her fists had convinced those foolish enough not to listen to think twice before messing with her family. She also remembered back to the time that they had told the girls that they contained the fox 1 year ago. Flashback. "Now girls, there's something. Naruto, get off Naruto," called Minato as he attempted to speak to his children while them seemed intent on their own activities. The three children had been engaged in a poking battle while they sat on the couch facing their parents, and Naruto had finally abandoned subtlety and tackled her older triplet over the back of the couch moments before, just as their father began to speak to them. Meanwhile, Minami was rolling around giggling at the whole thing, her tiny hands clasped over her mouth as she tried and failed to stifle her giggles. A moment later, the two blondes emerged from the back of the couch grinning and laughing at their red-faced father, while their mother giggled off to the side at her husband's failed attempts to control their children. Receiving nothing but laughter for his efforts, Minato looked pleadingly at his wife for help with the situation. "Okay, you two, front and center, we have something important to say, you can play later," called Kushina, finally taking pity on her husband's attempts and deciding to handle her children. "Hi, cousin!" The three trumpeted in unison, suddenly sitting straight up on the couch once more, silently waiting for their parents to continue. For a moment, Minato could only blink from his wife to his three kids with a look of shock upon his face, wondering how she could do that so easily before deciding better of it. "Ahem, anyway, there's something important we need to tell Naruto and Minami today, and Naruto, you need to know too," began Minato as the three listened eagerly. The two parents then proceeded to tell the three children how the Kyuubi had attacked, how the three had been taken to be sealed, and how Naruto and Minami become the next Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi just like their mother before them. After they had finished their story, the pair of children sat silently looking between their parents', horror slowly creeping their faces. Seeing fear upon their daughters' faces, both Minato and Kushina started to assure the two girls that everything would be alright, but their son beat them to it. "So you two have a big fox in your tummies, that's so cool. How does that feel? Is it fuzzy? Where can I get one?" Naruto called, excitedly fired off question after question while poking both of his sisters' stomachs, unintentionally tickling them. Nah, Naruto, hehehe, stop that, the hehe tickles, laughed Minami as she tried to get her brother to stop, the tears that had begun to form out of fear and sadness turning to happiness before she could even let them fall. Hehe onaikan hehehe, no fair, stop that, laughed Naruto, who like her sister had her mind shift from sadness to happiness due to her brother's assault, her hands trying and failing to batter his away as he continued to poke at both of the girls, drawing fresh giggles from their lips. But why, you said you have a fox in your tummy, so I'm just petting him, maybe he's ticklish too, smiled Naruto while continuing to play with the two sisters, each glancing at each other through their laughter before smiling back at their brother and tackling him to the floor, intent on paying him back, with cries of fox power, and for the fluffy one ringing out amongst the children's laughter. In the end, the serious discussion of the daughter's burden culminated in 3 children, 2 blonde and 1 redhead, rolling around before their parents laughing and playing, the fears of what they had learned banished before they be given life. Meanwhile, both Minato and Kushina looked on happily at their children, silently thanking their little maelstrom for protecting his sisters from their own doubts. Well, Kushina-chan, I don't think we have to worry about them feeling bad as long as Naruto is around, smiled Minato as Kushina nodded to him, her own thoughts, remembering the words of her predecessor Mito, and knowing that within this family they would always find the love they needed to hold strong to their burden. Flashback end. Just as Kushina allowed her memories to fade, Minato entered into the kitchen only to be bowled over by 2 blonde missiles that tackled him to the floor, with ear-to-ear smiles and cries of "To-san" as she watched Minato disentangled himself from the 2 with help from Minami, who always seemed the more adult of the trio, and helped her father to his feet. Well, how my favorite family is today? Asked Minato as he walked over to Kushina, planting a kiss on her cheek as he did so. Your family is fine, dear. We were all just getting dinner ready before the party tonight, isn't that right, kids? Kushina said, smiling down at the 3. Hi! Called the 3, smiles covering all 3 of their faces. Well, that's great, guys, replied Minato as he moved to help Kushina with the meal, fussing over her to the point she had to swat him with her ladle just to get him to calm down. After dinner, the group proceeded to get dressed for the arrival of their guests for the party, before they headed out to the QB celebration. Once they were all down in the living room again, Minato called his family forward to make a quick announcement before the guests arrived. Now, Minami, Naruto, I have talked to your cousin, and we have decided that we need to begin you training a little early, so that we can get you guys ready for the academy next year, he said, smiling down at his girls. Both girls smiled brightly at this, Naruto even jumping up and down, saying how awesome it was going to be to become a kunoichi as they looked excitedly towards their parents. However, both stopped a moment later when they realized that their brother wasn't celebrating. Naruto was looking between his sisters and his parents, wondering why he hadn't been mentioned, his little face turning towards Minato, confusion evident upon his face. Ano, To-san? Spoke Naruto, prompting Minato to turn towards his son. Am I going to start my training with Naruto-chan and Minami-chan? Questioned Naruto as his amatos soon turned to look from their brother to Minato and turned just as confused as the blonde boy. Well, you see, Naruto-kun, your sisters need to learn to control the fox so they will be safe as kunoichi in the academy. But once they have gotten the hang of it, you can join in training, but for right now we have to make sure they are safe. I know it's hard, but for right now we have to work with the girls a little more. Spoke Minato, kneeling down so that he was closer to his son, his face an odd mix of sadness and determination that was lost to the young child. His Taozen's words caused Naruto to turn towards his 2 sisters, who were watching him with worried expressions, as though they were scared he was going to blame them for this, and worse, that they would be leaving him behind. From the time they were kids they had always been inseparable, and the idea of leaving Naruto to fend for himself sounded wrong to them. As Naruto saw the pair's expressions slowly shifting, he realized they were worried about him, and thought back to what his To-san had just told him. He did want to train with his sisters, but he remembered hearing from Kushina once that training with the Kyuubi had been hard for her. That must be what this was, so if he wanted his 2 sisters to be okay when they entered into the academy, he'd have to wait a bit. Well, that was okay, wasn't it? And besides, it wasn't like his parents were going to not train him, they just needed to look after his sisters first, that was all, he reassured himself as he nodded towards Minato. Okay, To-san, I understand, replied the blonde boy, smiling as he turned to face his sisters. You 2 better train hard, or when I join I'll leave you in the dust, boosted Naruto, smiling as he saw the pair shift from concern to happiness at his assurance. Oh yeah, well, I'm going to train so hard, I'll be Hokage like To-san before your training starts, shot back Naruto, not one to back down from a challenge as a confident smile split across her face. Yo, we will be so great you'd be begging us to teach you what we know, added Minami, inwardly happy that her brother was going to be okay, and promising to be strong enough to help him like he helped her at learning about her burden. "Okay kids, it's about time for the guests to show up," called Kushina, getting the three to separate and calm down in time to greet their guests. Time skip. It was now almost a year later, and the triplets had just turned 6 a few days ago, while their newest little sister Mito was just turning 1. The three had changed little during the year in manner of looks. Meanwhile, their new little sister had been growing quickly into a little bundle of energy that the whole family adored. Little Mito, with bright red hair and violet eyes, was like a little Kushina in the making, and her bubbly excitement was partially infectious to anyone who met her. Over the years since the birth, Minato and Kushina had been training Naruto and Minami to harness and control the QB chakra, making steady progress as they worked with the pair. Minato had even called Jiraiya to stop by and help train the two whenever he was free. As a result, the two sisters had begun to blossom as future kunoichi, each determined to make their family proud. Speaking of family, one of their instructors usually sported a little red-headed babe at most of their sessions. Following the birth, Kushina was often found with Mito in her arms, instructing the two while she watched them practice. Meanwhile, the children's godmother Tsunade was busy most of the time with the medical program she had pushed through after the QB event, but still found time to stop by and spoil her goddaughters rotten and patch them up when they managed to bang themselves up like children are wont to do. Sadly, even as Minami and Naruto grew steadily closer to their family, their brother was slowly fading from that same light. Naruto found himself being left out little by little from family activates, slowly being overshadowed by those around him as his sisters drew more and more attention. After the birth of Mito, his parents tended to stress their attention between his sisters training and looking after their newest little member, leaving little time for him. Meanwhile, those outside of the family, like Jiraiya, while kind to Naruto but only present every now and then, and for some reason that Naruto didn't understand, seemed to focus only his twin sisters. At the same time, his godmother, Tsunade, was always chatting with his sisters whenever she was visiting, helping to patch them up whenever their training got out of hand, leading to a strong connection between all of them. But whenever she looked at Naruto, he would notice her eyes getting teary, before she turning from him, leaving him alone and confused in her wake. What he could not know was that Naruto looked so much like Tsunade's younger brother when he was growing up that Tsunade could not look at him without remembering her brother's death. So instead of facing her fear head-on, she simply chose to avoid Naruto. While she did not dislike the boy, she simply told herself that he had others to look after him. So slowly Naruto became more and more excluded from his family. While his sisters still played with him occasionally, they had begun to incorporate training into their games, playing ninja, running, and the like that he could simply not keep up with. But as always, he insisted that they go on ahead, not wanting to make them feel bad about their abilities. Despite everything happening to his life, Naruto stayed the same kind boy he had always been. He smiled and laughed, and did whatever he could to see his family smile. And that was no different today, almost a full year after his sisters had begun their training. The birthday was in full swing now, with people milling around. All of the clan heads in attendance to offer their congratulations to Mito turning 1. Speaking of Mito, she was sitting happily, in a bright white onesie with an Uzumaki spiral adorning it on the back, between the feet of her older brother, while giggling as they played with her. As Mito sat laughing as she rolled around under her brother's gaze as it trailed to the yard where Naruto and Minami were off playing with a few of the clan heirs, while Minato and Kushina were talking with their parents and discussing the upcoming year at the academy, where many of their children would be attending. As Naruto continued to play with his red-haired Amato, he heard a quiet voice call out to him from behind. Turning, his mixed eyes fell upon bluish hair and wide eyes of his best friend, Hinata Hyuga. The two had only known each other for a few months, but already they were almost inseparable thanks to an event back when they had first met, where he had stepped up to protect her against some bullies at the park. Flashback. Naruto had been walking through the park wondering what to do while his sisters were off playing shinobi tag, when he heard the sound of raised voices from behind a clump of trees a bit off the trail. Curious, Naruto headed towards the voices. Upon arriving, he had found Hinata in a circle of boys, all making fun of her and pushing her to the ground. "Hey, leave her alone!" shouted Naruto, running up to stand between the bullies and Hinata, the girl's eyes still moist with tears, looking up to see the blonde-haired boy standing before her. As he came slowly into focus, she suddenly remembered seeing him from afar when the Hokage had met with her father. Who's this kid?" asked one of the boys, looking at Naruto, as beside him his friends shook their heads, not having any idea. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, and I won't let you pick on her," shouted Naruto at the bullies, raising both his fists in front of him to make his point clear. The bullies stared at Naruto with varying looks of confusion, before one finally spoke. "Wait, I thought the Hokage only had 2 kids, the village princesses?" muttered one, looking at his fellows, who nodded at him. "Yeah, everyone knows that, you moron," said another, pointing at Naruto. "Let's teach him for lying about our Hokage guys," shouted the last, as the boys fell upon Naruto. Hinata could only watch as her hero was attacked by the three boys, trying but failing to stand up to the onslaught of all three. She was about to try and help him when a pair of yellow and red blurs crashed into the bullies, blowing them back off the small form that was Naruto. "Hey! Which one of you wants to tell me why you are hurting my Anasin?" shouted the enraged form of Naruto, as she stood protectively in front of her brother, blonde hair wiping back as her blue eyes trailed across the stunned bullies. "Never mind, Naruto. It doesn't matter what they say, they're still getting a butt kicking for hurting out Onizen," called Minima, cracking both her knuckles like her godmother often did whenever their godfather did something perverted, the three boys shivering as the pair advanced on them. Before the three boys could do more than cry out in fear, the girls were upon them, returning each punch tenfold for having hurt their brother. During this commotion, Naruto had slowly gotten up and looked around to find Hinata looking worriedly towards him, her eyes still moist with tears. Smiling at her, Naruto half dragging himself over till he was beside her, looking her over with an obvious amount of concern. "Hey, are you okay? They didn't hurt you, did they?" asked Naruto once he got close enough to see Hinata clearly. Hinata in turn simply nodded slightly as her mind raced, trying to figure out who this boy was before her. "Wait, I thought the Hokage only had 2 girls, but they just said he was their brother, so wait, does that mean the Hokage's son just saved me?" she thought in a rush, even as a red blush began to creep over her face as Naruto leaned in looking concerned. "Hey bro, you okay?" came the call of Naruto, who had just finished giving the world's worst wedgie to one of his would-be attackers. Turning at her call, Naruto found himself smiling at the sight of the 3 bullies now tearing across the clearing, all crying as his sisters stood triumphantly before him. "Oh, course, Databeo, I'm fine, those guys couldn't beat me if they tried," he said, trying not to show that he was actually pretty hurt. "Onizen, what are we going to do with you?" sighed Minami as she approached, shaking her head slightly. "You're not strong enough to protect yourself yet, try thinking before you act," she finished, looking a little sad at lecturing the boy for getting himself hurt. "I'm Anta strong, I'm going to be stronger than both of you, just wait till we get into the academy and you'll see," Naruto replied, standing up and thrusting his fist into the air. "Baka," Minami said while putting her hand over her face. She knew her brother wanted to be strong, but the fact remained that he was only going to get himself hurt if he kept on going the way he was. She was also getting more and more annoyed with how he seemed unwilling to realize it. Why doesn't Onizen see how far behind he is? I mean, he just keeps saying that Kassen and Tusen will train him soon, and he'll show us then. Onizen has to learn how things work, or he's going to get himself hurt," she thought as beside her Naruto had other ideas. "Ha, no way bro, I'm going to be the best and become Hokage. You don't need to worry, I'll always be here to protect my baby brother. And then I'll train you too, but only if you ask nicely," laughed Naruto as she smiled at her brother. Naruto responded to her jab by sticking his tongue out and telling her that he would be better than her in no time, and the two degraded into a small friendly argument, while Hinata and Minami watched on. Flashback end. After that, Naruto had gotten to know Hinata slowly, the two becoming fast friends, playing when they could, and generally just enjoying each other's company. Each also learning the similarity they shared in their family. Like Naruto, Hinata seemed to have been slowly pushed away after the birth of her younger brother a little over a year back. The little boy Hanabi having become the center of attention within the Hyuga household, happy that he had emerged despite the worry surrounding the boy's cousin. Their mother had been sick for several months while carrying little Hanabi, but thanks to the presence of Tsunade she had pulled through, though the events surrounding the birth still resulted in her being bound to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. This on top of the new child severely hampered Hitomi's ability to look after her daughter, but if nothing else the Hyuga woman was stubborn to a fault, and did what she could for her daughter even if it was just the two sitting in compound's gardens together. Hinata's father, however, was a bit of a different story. He had latched onto his son and had become more and more attentive to him, bragging about how he was going to raise him to be the greatest gentle fist user, even better than his brother's son Niji. Unfortunately for Hinata, she was born into a family where power and skill seemed destined to decide one's fate, the competition slowly growing throughout her family, making for a hard place for the innocent girl. But for now she was free from that as she smiled across at her friend and his Amato. "Hello Naruto-kun," whispered Hinata as she approached the pair of Namikes, guiding her Ototo Hanabi as she did so. While Hinata took after her mother, Hanabi was a little Hayashi in every regard, and walked with a sense of pride that made him an odd sight, only being 1 year old himself. His stoic mask broke, however, when the little red-headed Mito walked over to him, smiling wildly into his stoic face. Before the little Hyuga could do more than look at this smiling redhead, Mito let out a happy giggle before throwing her blanket towards the boy's head, intent to drape him in it. Hanabi, seeing the blanket approach, tried to perform the spinning move he had seen Hyuga do to deflect things from hitting them, but sadly not understanding that only twirling wasn't going to save him as the blanket fell over him, winding its way around him so that he soon found himself wrapped up and on the floor looking up at a giggling redhead who dropped down to start pushing playfully at the trapped boy. While the two one-year-old had been having their tiff, Naruto and Hinata had begun talking about the academy, hoping they would both be in the same class when it started. And so on. This continued throughout the evening until at long last the guests had left, and only the Namake's family remained. As their parents tucked each of their children in for the night, Naruto sat waiting in bed for the chance to ask his parents the question that he had been waiting a full year to ask. When the two came in to wish him good night, they found Naruto bouncing up and down on the bed in restless excitement. "Now what has got you so excited?" asked Kushina, smiling down at her son as Naruto's excited eyes turned to her. "Well, Kassen, now that Mito is one, does that mean I can join the training now, can I?" asked Naruto with stars in his eyes as he looked between his parents. At his question, Kushina felt a slight pang of guilt as she looked down at the smiling face of her son. She had only recently been able to get back up and start to help the girls with their training, and despite their improvement they were still not where both Minato and she wanted them to be before Naruto joined them. With Mito finally becoming old enough to not need her complete attention, she had hoped to move towards training the girls on a more hands-on approach to finish things up. Meanwhile, beside her, Minato was biting back his own guilt as flashes a choice he made assaulted him like so many hammering blows. He still had to help his girls prepare for the job they would have in the future, he knew that, and for that he also knew what he would have to sacrifice. But he had to make sure they were ready if everything he cared about was to be protected. "Besides, I went through the academy without help, so did Sensei. It's not like I'm leaving him to the wolves, and there will be time later, yeah later," thought the man as he shook himself back to reality, looked down at his son. "Well?" spoke Minato, drawing Naruto's attention to him. "I think it would be best for you to start up in your academy studies before we start your training, son," spoke Minato as Kushina looked to him a little worried. "Who, but why?" asked Naruto, looking confused. "Well, you see, son, the academy will be able to tell where you are good at, so that when you start with us, we will be able to teach you even faster, and we don't want you having trouble with both our training and the academy work," lied Minato, even as he felt the pang of guilt in knowing that he was misleading his child. But I thought I would get to be trained by you," whispered Naruto, looking sadly between his parents, feeling a horrible sinking feeling in his chest as the joy and excitement that had been building there tumbled away. "You will, Sochi. We'll be training you in no time, but we need to make sure we don't rush things," said Kushina, feeling tears on the corners of her eyes even as she saw the confusion on her son's face, as she too threw in the white lie she hated herself for using. Naruto, for his part, looked back and forth between his parents, feeling a multitude of questions springing to life within his head. Why can't they train me? I mean, they love me, right, and they train Naruto and Minami. Why am I being left out? Hey, why does mom look sad? I hate it when she looks like that. Stupid Naruto, of course they love you, look, they are sad, you don't like them looking after you, baka. Quick smile, show them you're okay. Wait, why, I mean I am sad, maybe they should feel bad, no, I won't let them be sad, Databeo, thought Naruto as he pushed back his confusion, forcing a smile onto his lips. I'm okay, he said happily, causing both parents to relax slightly. But when I know what I'm good at, you better be ready, because I'm going to show you that I'm the greatest shinobi ever, Databeo, cried the boy, his words causing both parents to let out a breath at this, relieved that Naruto seemed to be taking the idea okay. Soon they finished tucking him in and left to look after Mito, before turning in themselves. As the pair moved down the hall towards their own room, Kushina found herself doubting her own actions as she turned to her husband. "Minato, do you think this is okay? I mean, leaving Naruto out, he needs to be trained too, you know. Sure, I want to make sure the girls are okay, but lying to him like that, it's just wrong," finished Kushina solemnly as she and him got ready for bed. "I know, Kushina, but we need to make sure the girls are looked after first, and you are the only one who can safely train them. Either of them are able to form your chains, so we need to be careful. I just don't want to see any of the hurt. Sometimes we have to tell a white light to protect them, but we'll never stop loving him, Kushina, and we'll make it up to him, I promise," Minato replied softly, silently trying to convince himself, even though he knew he was only telling half-truths. "I guess we'll start his training up next year, and then we'll make him an amazing shinobi, right?" Kushina responded with an almost pleading note to her voice. "We will make it up to him, Kushina, I promise," replied Minato as he laid down to sleep beside his wife, feeling as though his mind would tear itself apart for what he was doing. Meanwhile, down the hall, Naruto was having more problems falling to sleep as well. His mind continued to fire off contradictory arguments about his parents' behavior. Why don't they train me with my sisters? Is it my fault? No, I haven't done anything. What should do? I want to be strong enough to protect them. No, they are both awesome shinobi, they have to have reason for what they're doing, right? He continued to ask himself, desperate for some kind of answer. Will you stop that? I'm trying to sleep here," shouted a feminine voice from seemingly all around the room as Naruto froze, wondering for a moment if his silent pleading had been answered. Naruto looked wildly around in an attempt to see where it was coming from, only seeing the shadowed shapes of his room before him. "Who said that?" he shouted, still looking around his room, starting to get a little frightened as he continued to see no one that could have spoken to him. "Learn some manners and I might just tell you, you little seedling," replied the voice once again, seemingly coming from nowhere. With nothing else for it, Naruto decided to answer the voice. "I'm okay, mister." "That's Ms." the voice interrupted. "Sorry, Ms., but where are you and why can't I see you?" asked Naruto, wondering what was going on. "Am I going crazy? You see, this is what you get for being stupid. Kami is making you hear voices?" he thought to himself before he was interrupted from his mental berating by the sound of laughter. "Kami, hee hee ha, oh that's good, me Kami, that's priceless. I wouldn't be caught dead looking after the universe, too much work," chuckled the voice, slowly petering out into a small fit of giggles. "Wait, how did you hear me? Where are you?" asked Naruto, again searching for the source of the voice, this time looking under his bed as if he expected to see someone hiding under it. "You can stop looking for me, little seedling. I'm not in your room, I'm in your head," the voice stated as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. This caused Naruto to stop dead in his search and look across to his wall where a mirror hung, as if expecting to see another face reflected upon it. "What do you want with my head? What's going on? Who are you, Ms.? What do you want?" asked Naruto, firing off questions one after another. "Relax already, you're going to give yourself a heart attack. I swear you little seedlings are all the same. To answer your question, I suppose you can just call me Jubi, and what I want is to make a deal with you," spoke the voice as Naruto continued to stare into the mirror. "A life forgotten. What do you want with my head? What's going on? Who are you, Ms.? What do you want?" Naruto called, firing question after question out with hardly a pause between them. "Relax already, you're going to give yourself a heart attack. I swear you little seedlings are all the same," sighed the voice as she waited for the boy, who seemed to have finally run out of steam, to quiet down. As he finally fell silent, the voice spoke out again, echoing in the empty room. "To answer your question, I suppose you can just call me Jubi, and what I want is to make a deal with you," continued the voice as Naruto looked across the room into the mirror that showed his own puzzled face. "Jubi?" muttered Naruto, quirking one eyebrow up as he spoke, a little surprised by the word. "Well, that's a weird name," he thought to himself as he crossed his arms in thought. "I will have you know it is not a weird name, young seedling, and it is not polite to insult someone who can make your head explode from the inside out," the Jubi replied with an air that only an irritated woman could pull off. "Ah!" shouted Naruto a moment before rolling off of his bed, both hands now clapped to the side of his head as he thumped to the wooden floor, where he proceeded to roll back and forth in apparent panic. "No, Ms. Jubi, don't blow up my head. Please, Ms. Pretty Beautiful, kind loving Jubi, you wouldn't do that to me, would you? Please?" begged Naruto as he rolled to a halt, looking into the mirror with rivers spilling from both of his eyes as he clapped his hands before him as though in prayer. "Oh, this is priceless, you're great, I can't wait to see what else I can make you do," calmed the amused voice of Jubi from seemingly everywhere in the room. "Oh, this was so much better than being stuck in the moon," thought the voice, at least he or she could have fun messing with humans again. After finally getting her amused giggles under control, Jubi turned her attention back out to her host, noticing as she did that he had fallen silent once more. "Hey little seedling, you still alive out there?" asked the Jubi as she once again looked out through the boy's eyes to see his face now turned from fear into a childish pout that was looking back at him from his own re-election. "Ah, does the little seedling not like being picked on by the big bad Jubi?" She laughed, looking at the cute pouting form of Naruto, who had brought his arms up folded before him as he looked pointedly away from his reflection as if trying to ignore the voice. "That wasn't funny," muttered the boy, still refusing to look at his own reflection as if that was who he was conversing with. "Oh, on the contrary, I think it was quite funny," replied the Jubi, waiting a few moments for a response from the boy, who seemed quite set on ignoring her. "So do you want to know what my deal is, or do you want to sit pouting on your floor all night? Because I can wait a lot longer than you, seedling," chuckled the Jubi as she saw the boy glancing back to his reflection, a thoughtful expression upon his young face, as he slowly let his arms fall to his sides. "I guess," mumbled the boy, finally turning to face the mirror again, even if he was only facing his reflection. Ms. Jubi, is there a way that I can see you? It's kinda weird talking to myself," called the boy as he gave his reflection another glance. The boy's remarks seemed to trigger something within the woman as her own thoughts turned back to a time when her only companion had been her voice, and how that long loneliness had come to an end so many years ago. Flashback. The disembodied consciousness of Jubi was silently flouting within her lunar prison, her thoughts cast out once more to how she had managed to let some stupid women steal her charge, and worse, let that same women's children seal her away after robbing her of her power and children in one fell swoop. As her thoughts began to swirl, the agitation became too much as she called out into the starry night. If I ever see that woman and her sons again, I'll seal them in this stupid rock, and see how they like it," screamed Juby into the silence of the moon that she called home. It had been thousands of years since that stupid sage had sealed her into this lunar prison, and with only her thoughts to keep her company, the time had passed very slowly indeed. Her only reprieve had been when on a full moon's night she could cast her gaze down at the world, these brief glimpses being all that kept her from falling to absolute despair within her celestial tomb. So tonight, like those before, she turned her gaze upon the earth, not knowing that this moment would spell that end to her long exile. As her eyes slowly shifted down, her attention was immediately drawn to a commotion within a forested land. As she looked closer, she saw her youngest son causing his usual 9 kinds of hell for the people of a shinobi village. As she watched, her son swiped his tails back and forth across the armies of the village, his mouth open in a roar of rage, but something was wrong. That rage, it wasn't his. As she watched the great kitsune raging among the trees, she saw his almost rabid assault upon the village that sat burning beneath him, her eyes narrowing as she saw his eyes momentarily turn skyward, his eyes sporting a horribly familiar red marking. Her memories recalled the only other time she had seen her son like this, all those years ago in that valley, as he stood between the descendants of that stupid women, used as a pawn in their petty battles for power. As her memories fell into place beside the bison before her, an uncontrollable rage boiled up within her. "Damn them!" she yelled as she struggled hopelessly against her prison walls. "It's not enough that they bind me here, but they have to continue to use my children in their stupid war," cried the woman as she looked down at her son's body paraded like a puppet to that family's tune. "Leave him alone, you bastards. When I get out of here, I swear I'm going to tear them limb from limb and scatter their ashes to the 4 winds so even Cammy can't put their bodies back together. Let him go!" screamed the Jubi as below her son continued to rage. Even as she howled and struggled, her eyes noticed as an older figure charged along to attack her son. Unable to tear her eyes away, she watched the battle began, the shinobi throwing everything he had in an attempt to halt her son's assault on the village. As the struggled, her eyes turned to a small ceiling table which appeared behind the man, her attention now drawn to the 3 small bundles that lay upon it. Turning her attention back to the battle, she watched as one of the attacking figures split formed the fight, turning to run towards the table, as the seals around it began to glow, illuminating the night sky around it. Then he appeared, the one she had long ago known, the brother of her lord, the lord she had failed so long ago. "No, it can't be," whispered Jubi, her tone speaking of the disbelief currently running through her, as she gazed upon the figure who had emerged from behind the old shinobi. But there he was, the Shinigami himself, in all of his terrible glory, his hollowed mask looking down across the bundles before him before turning to look up upon the great kitsune. Then, before she could overcome her shock, she was forced to watch as his hands reached out to tear her child apart. She watched helplessly as the hands tore the yin and yang from her son, his roars of pain flooding the night sky as her own rang out in the heavens above. And still all she could do was watch as the Shinigami's hands dragged the 2 halves into the children, sealing her son once again into a living prison. As the scene slowly came to an end, Jubi found herself openly weeping at the sight of her son's fate. The 9 may have never been her chosen children, but they were born from her, and like any mother, she could no more bear their suffering than her own. As the final flickers of her son began to fail, Jubi found herself turning from the surface, not wishing to see any more, not able to bear to see her children suffer, as she sat helplessly above them. Then, just as her eyes slowly turned away from the lands below, a gentle pressure caught her, as though a hand had reached up to halt her from looking away. As she turned towards that feeling, her eyes found themselves moving down towards the table beside which the Shinigami still stood, looking up towards the moon right into her eyes. As the pair's eyes meet, the Shinigami slowly inclining its head towards the final bundle upon the table. Watching, Jubi saw the skeletal hand of the figure moving to trace a small seal upon the boy's brow, her symbol, as he looked back to her as if to tell her that it was waiting. For a moment she was unable to even believe that this was happening. Had Cammy finally heard her prayers? After all of these years, was she finally being given a second chance, a place outside of this moon prison to once again live in a chance for freedom? The Shinigami once again shifted his head, motioning for the Jubi to move towards the bundle even as its form began to fade. As the ghostly figure slowly began to dissipate, she shook herself from her thoughts as she looked back to the disappearing figures, her lips parting as a chocked voice issued out. "Thank you," she whispered as she allowed the pull from the ceiling table to draw her down towards the final struggling bundle. And so, as her soul had finally been freed from her lunar prison, finally back to the world she had so long been apart from. And so she found herself slipping gently into the final struggling babe who lay beside his siblings, a small look of peace crossing his face as the seal upon his head glowed faintly before fading. Flashback end. As Jubi shook herself from her memories, her attention returned to the small blonde still looking curiously at his reflection as she felt a small smile crossing her lips. Well, since you asked nicely, I guess we can meet face to face, spoke Jubi as she considered the how to go about handling the situation before her. Tell me, boy, do you know what a mindscape is? Asked the woman's voice after a moment, as she watched the boy blinking at her words. Naruto in reply cocked his head to one side at the question, moving to recross his arms in what passed for a 6-year-old's thinking pose. For a full minute the blonde sat there, his eyes closed in apparent concentration, as Jubi waited silently, starting to wonder if the boy had slipped back to sleep on her. After a little longer, Naruto suddenly opened his eyes with a look of confidence on his face as he spoke. Nope, no idea, he called as a wide grin found itself spreading across his face. For a moment Jubi simply looked at the boy's smile before letting out a sigh as she shook her head. You know that's not something you should be particularly proud of, seedling, pointed out the woman as Naruto's smile faded, replaced with an annoyed look. Hey, it's not my fault. If you're so smart, why don't you tell me what it is, Databayo? Naruto fired back as Jubi's face quirked up into a smirk the boy could not see. What did I say about asking nicely? Jubi whispered in a dangerously sweet voice that caused Naruto to freeze, his mixed eyes to go wide as he shifted back into his pleading look, complete with clasped hands. Please tell me, smart, pretty, nice Ms. Jubi, gushed Naruto with a hint of panic as he looked to his own reflection, hoping his head wouldn't explode any moment. Nice to see you remember. Oh, and drop the Ms, but the pretty you can leave, chuckled Jubi as she focused on drawing the boy into his mindscape. Now just relax, I'll help you in this time so you can get a feel for it, she called as her presence reached forwards towards the boy's own. Even as the final words echoed within the boy's mind, he felt a tug on the back of his neck as darkness slowly closed in from the outsides of his vision. At first the sudden blackness terrified the young boy as it slowly crept across his eyes, swallowing him whole. However, just as the last vestiges of light disappeared, his eyes were suddenly assaulted with a blinding flash that caused him to raise his hands before his face as an impromptu shield. A moment later, as the light slowly faded, Naruto lowered his arms, allowing his eyes gaze around at his new surroundings. Where before, he would have seen the simple plaster walls of his room, with its usual amount of mess, he instead saw a massive expanse of blue and green stretching out to the horizon. A moment before he had been sitting in his room on the second floor of his home, but now found himself in an open field, the soft green grass now all around him brushing lightly against his bare feet. As he turned his eyes skyward, he saw a cloudless blue sky that seemed to stretch on for miles in every direction, on and on, as if this land had no true end to it. Feeling the touch of the green ground below him, Naruto's eyes fell across his orange pajama from to the grass on hand, running gently through it as he pushed himself up from the ground, his mind already buzzing with questions. Where am I? Last thing I remember was something about mindscape, and that voice saying something about helping me. Was I dreaming? Wait, no, is this that mindscapey thing? But this just looks like some field like the ones outside the village. Maybe that's all that happened, I just fell asleep in the field. Though the boy as he continued to take in his surroundings. However, before he could continue to try and explain how he had found himself in this deserted field, a voice jerked him back to reality. Well, are you going to sit there all day, or are you going to say hello, seedling? Things may pass slowly here, but you don't strike me as the patient type, called the voice now coming from behind the blonde instead of from his own mind. At the call, Naruto spun towards the source of the voice, his eyes traveling across the plain to the peak of a large hill. He suddenly realized he was standing at the base of. Looking up the hill, the blonde's eyes were immediately drawn to the summit where a single magnificent tree stood. The tree stretched some 40 feet into the air, and had bark of pale white, as though the clouds absent in the blue skies had been formed to create its massive trunk. As the boy's eyes trailed up the great tree, his eyes found an explosion of color awaiting him as the thousands of gently swaying leaves formed a great canopy above him, each of the leaves shining with a deep purple light, or shifting to an odd glowing black as thought the leaves themselves had not chosen what color to remain. The tree seemed the center of this place, as though the blue skies and grass themselves were given light from its branches. Slowly Naruto began to approach the top of the hill, feeling an odd pull to reach the beautiful thing. As he continued to get closer, he felt a strange peace about him, as though he was greeting an old friend that he hadn't seen in a great while. Soon he reached the summit, and stood before the tree, a rather disconcerting thought popping into his head as he looked up at the massive tree. Great, I'm talking to a giant purple tree. Oh, that's just great. This is what I get for eating all that ramen. Minami was right, it's rotted my brain. Stupid delicious ramen, thought the boy as he extended one hand towards the bark of the tree, curious to see if it felt as soft as it looked. I wouldn't do that if I were you, little seedling. At least not until we have our talk. Oh, and I'm not just some talking tree, called the familiar voice now coming from directly above the boy. The sudden voice caught Naruto off guard as he jumped slightly back from the tree, looking back and forth for the source of the voice before a small giggle drew his attention up into the softly shifting purple canopy. "That's right, I'm up here, seedling," called the voice once again, a small smile almost visible in the words alone. Looking up, Naruto's eyes fell upon the outline of a figure he could barely see against the tree, his eyes squinting to get a better look. As if in answer to his desire, the figure began to descend slowly from above one of the branches, bending to accommodate its passenger, as the pair moved steadily towards the blonde boy. As the branch came closer, the figure sitting upon it slowly came into clearer focus. She sat gracefully upon the branch, one hand draped lightly over her lap while the other held the side of her living transport, figures draped lightly over the silken branch. Her hair was the same shade of purple as the leaves of the tree and seemed to glow with the same simple radiance as the tree as it fell about her shoulders, waving gently as she gazed down upon the boy. Her skin was porcelain white like the bark of the tree itself, covered in a simple kimono that lay upon her, adorned with the pattern that mirrored the falling of leaves. Despite the simplicity of the dress, it somehow seemed to only intensify her beauty, as it curved gracefully around her form, accenting her beauty and strength in equal proportions. However, despite this staggering image, what drew Naruto's focus was the woman's face. The gentile heart-shaped curve set between the waves of her purple hair turned towards him as a smile played across her lips. But even this was not where the boy's gaze sat. His gaze fell only upon her eyes, her unearthly eyes. They glowed pure black, as though one were looking into a night sky that had yet to give forth any stars. Yet they were somehow welcoming, like some great expanse that was begging to be explored, the warm glow seeking to embrace one just as night would come to embrace day in the endless dance of the heavens. "Well, my little seedling, what do you think? Not too bad for a woman that has been trapped in the moon for the last 1,000 years. Called Jubi, as the branch finished its decent settling before Naruto, as Jubi rose slowly from it, her bare feet alighting upon the grass as she looked down at the boy who now came only to her waist. "Wow," whispered Naruto as he looked at this woman, lost for words at the woman who had literally just descended from on high. All he could do was look at her in silence for a few moments, as he took in her image, noticing the small smile upon her lips growing into a slightly amused expression as her eyes crinkled near their edges. "I know I'm amazing, seedling, but if you're just going to stare at me all night, then I'm afraid we won't get much accomplished," giggled Jubi as she brought one of her hands up to push a few stands from before her face as Naruto seemed to shake himself out of his stupor. Sorry. It's just I've never seen anyone with eyes like that before," said Naruto, looking down at his feet in an attempt to hide the blush at being caught just staring at the beautiful woman. I suppose you haven't at that. No one has seen my eyes since Kami himself sent me down to your world to guard his fruit upon my branches. Well, that stupid woman and her son saw them too, but I don't like to count them," remarked Jubi as she, adopting a simple thinking position, one hand raised to tap ideally at her smooth chin. "Who?" asked Naruto, turning his head on his side and once again adopting a confused expression as he looked at the woman before him. "Fruit, Kami, what are you talking about, pretty Jubi?" asked Naruto, remembering to add the little tick to the woman's name, drawing a small smile to her lips as she looked down at him. "I guess I'm laying a bit too much on you at the moment. This is our first meeting after all. Let's start over," said Jubi as she bowed slightly, as a lady of the court might, her eyes never leaving the boy before her. "My name is Josie, I know, Jubitsuri, but you may call me Jubi. I am a warrior of the heavens, and have been imprisoned in the moons for the past 1,000 years. You may also know me as the mother to those you call the tailed beasts," finished the woman as she rose, Naruto blinking up at her for a moment before rushing to bow as well. Oh right, well, I'm Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, son of the 4th Hokage and soon-to-be greatest ninja of Konohagakure Databayo," he said, glancing up to Jubi, who reached out to pat his blonde head, slightly nodding down at him. "Well, it's nice to finally meet you, Naruto. We'll have to work on your matters later, but for now let's get to why you're here," spoke the woman as she moved over to rest herself against the tree. Naruto soon moved after her, settling himself before her so that he was looking up into her face as she fixed him with those blackened eyes of her again. Josie, I know, Jubitsu Tsura," started Naruto as Jubi let out a small chuckle, waving him off. "I told you, seedling, just Jubi. I never liked the whole title anyway," called the woman as Naruto nodded, smiling as he looked around himself again. "Okay, up Jubi, where are we?" asked the blonde as Jubi looked around them at the open field with a small nod. "Well, this is a place in your mind, Naruto. Kind of like a room in your mind that I've organized to suit me," explained the Jubi. Seeing the confused look on Naruto's face, she continued. "Think of it like a little vacation home I just set up here. I can assure you that it won't harm you at all," smiled the woman as Naruto seemed to be satisfied with her words. "Oh, okay then," replied Naruto, a little loudly, a smile upon his face as he accepted the woman's words without a second thought. "My Kami, this kid is so innocent it's almost scary. He'll have to realize at some point it's going to get him into a world of trouble." Though I suppose that is the problem that led him here, isn't it? Thought Jubi as she let out a sigh, focusing back on the boy blinking up at her. Naruto, since I'm living in your head, I was thinking that I could do something for you. Like a way to pay you back for letting me say her. How would you like that? Asked the woman in an offhand way that nonetheless caught Naruto's attention, as he seemed to vibrate slightly at the prospect. Really, what do I get? Is it a cool superpower, or the extra chakra like my sisters? You said you were the tailed beast's mom. Does that mean I'm a Jinchuriki like my sisters? Hey, does that mean that I'll get training from my parents now just like my sisters? Does it, Ms. Jubi? Naruto called, firing question after question in that way only an excited child could. There were many things that Jubi was prepared for. An excited 6-year-old that was on the equivalent of a sugar high with the attention span of a gnat was not one of them. While there, seedling, hold on for a moment, I can't answer you if you never stop asking now, can I? Asked Jubi with an exasperated shake of her head. This caused Naruto to slap both his hands over his mouth in an over-the-top manner, as if to completely stop all sound from escaping from his mouth, as he looked worriedly towards the woman. Better. She chuckled as she looked over the boy before nodding slightly, as if deciding something. Now I guess I'll start with the question of chakra. I'm afraid that I don't really have any more chakra. You see, when a certain man, here she adopted an annoyed look, who we will just call Deadbeat, took my chakra from me. He used all of my power combined with my ability to give life to chakra in order to create the tailed beasts. So my power is in all of my children, like my youngest that is sealed into your sisters. Explained the purple-haired woman as Naruto gave her another puzzled look. Who but my sisters have the Kyuubi, the 9-tailed fox? Said Naruto, quirking his head to the side as he looked up into the woman's black eyes. Yep, that's my youngest, always trying to show he is the best of his siblings by flaunting his power, silly little boy. She said more to herself than to the boy, shaking her head slightly as she spoke. Anyway, the point is that I'm afraid I don't have any chakra to give you. But you are still a Jinchuriki, just not like your sisters. She finished her words, causing the boy before her to deflate slightly at her words. For a moment Naruto felt the happiness that had slowly been growing within him faltered as his hopes of being like his sisters were dashed. That doesn't mean I can't do anything for you on the superpowers though, added Jubi, hoping to get the boy's spirits back up. The result worked a little better than she was hoping for, as it caused the blonde to leap up off the grass and start running around the tree yelling about how cool it was. Before Jubi could even begin to call him back, he was already rounding the trunk, coming back to stand right in her face, blasting off questions once again. Really, that's awesome. What kind of powers? Will I be able to fly? That will be awesome. Or maybe I will be able to get some cool ability like a bloodline, like some of the clans. Tell me, Jubi, please. What is it? PPPPLLLEASSSE? He asked, falling to his knees and looking at her with stars in her eyes, his little face showing so much excitement that Jubi found herself smiling despite her slightly annoyance at the boy's performance. Drawing in a deep breath, Jubi set her face into a stern look as she gazed across at the boy, who seemed to freeze at her gaze. Okay, Naruto, we can't keep doing this song and dance all night. If you want me to help, you will sit there and listen to what I have to say, or I can just let your head explode, stated the pale-skinned woman as Naruto froze before nodding hurriedly. Yes, Jubi-sensei, called Naruto, falling back and sitting excitedly before her, rocking slightly back and forth as he smiled up at her. Good, now I'm afraid I don't have a magic wand to wave to give you superpowers, but what I can do is give you the training so that you can use my abilities with your own chakra, started the woman as Naruto nodded excitedly at her words. Now, before I get any farther, this would require you going through a long time of training, and it would require us to leave the village for a while, continued Jubi as Naruto blinked up at her. How long are we talking about? Asked the boy, watching as Jubi took a moment to think before replying. I would have to say at least 10 years to get the whole training done, but if you work hard, maybe just 8. What? 10 years? Are you crazy? I can't leave for 10 years. What about my family, my friends? What about my parents? They are going to start my training in a year. I can't just leave, shouted Naruto as he pushed himself to his feet, looking down at the woman who watched him, a small frown upon her lips. Poor boy, he is so worried about others that he is going to stunt his own growth just to make them feel better. And he's just stubborn enough not to care. God, what am I going to do now? Thought the woman, even as Naruto crossed his arm, fixing her with a determined look. I'm not leaving my family. My Tusan and Kazan are going to train me to be an amazing shinobi, and then I'll protect everyone, called Naruto as Jubi fixed him with a sad look upon her brow. Naruto, if you keep waiting for everything to work out, you're going to end up left behind, and me along with you. I'm trying to help you, but you need to be selfish this once, replied Jubi, fighting to keep her own voice steady as she slowly rose to her feet so that she towered over Naruto, who looked stubbornly back at her. So what do you care? They are my family. They care and love me. What makes you think you know what's better for me than them? called Naruto, now feeling slightly scared as his own worried found themselves now being directed towards the woman before him. It's not a matter of love you Baka, you want to be a shinobi, well you need to be ready. I have seen hundreds of kids like you go out to save everyone and only end up losing their own life as a result. She called flashes of her own battles rushing through her mind as she recalled those times such ideals had led her to fail in her mission, to caring to sacrifice the innocent to capture that hated woman. I can't. Jubi whispered as the fight left her, allowing her to slowly slip back to her sitting position, looking sadly up at Naruto, her lifetime alone crashing upon her, as she gazed at another who risked the same suffering. I can't let you sacrifice yourself for them. I can't watch helpless while those I have come to care about are taken from me. Continued the woman as Naruto's anger left him as he watched the woman seemingly shrink before him as her voice grew softer, more pained with every moment. I was just like you, all good intentions, and I lost my children to good intentions. I lost my freedom to good intentions. I am not prepared to see you lose everything I did, seedling. I can't live though seeing that again. She finished, turning her moist eyes towards the boy. Naruto looked again into those bright black eyes with the starlight tears that were falling from them as his own doubts surfaced. He hated to have these thoughts, and worse, he hated to see someone so sad. So he did the only thing he could think of. He stepped forward and embraced her, letting his smaller form to be pulled close to her, as she openly wept into his shoulder. It took a few moments for Jubi to regain her composure, and a little longer for Naruto to step back and allow her to right herself, rising to sit upon her branch once more, the small moist trails upon her cheeks still staining her beautiful face. I'm sorry I made you cry, Jubi, whispered the boy, looking into her face as he saw Jubi shaking her head slightly. No, Naruto, I'm sorry. I guess you are just like me after all, a couple of bakas. Smiled Jubi slightly as Naruto gave a small nod. Hi, two of a kind. Smiled Naruto, remembering one of the few phrases he had picked up from his godmother over the years. At his words, Jubi suddenly froze as her face slowly shifted into a smile as she looked back to the blonde boy before her. Well, maybe you aren't a baka after all, seedlings. I think you might have given me an idea how we can both win, she finished as Naruto gave her a puzzled look as she began to explain her plan to him. That night a decision was made that would rock the foundations of the shinobi world to their core, and from the hope of two bakas the world itself would find itself forever changed. Time skip. 2 years after that fateful night, within a simple classroom within the Shinobi Academy, a group of potential shinobi in Kunoichi sat listening with varying amounts of attention to the words of a man who stood before them, marking off notes on a wide blackboard. However, most were too distracted to listen as an odd little mantra permeated the entire classroom, drawing several eyes as the steady beat continued. Board thud, board thud, board thud, board thud, board thud. Continued the steady beat, drawing more and more eyes as it continued. The source of this mantra being a particular orange-clad, blonde-haired boy who sat in the back of the room, where he was banging his head against his desk while droning on and on like some broken metronome. Already his seemingly continuous banging had attracted the attention of a large majority of the class, and even he, Chun-Nin, instructor himself. God, is that baka ever going to stop? He is messing up the lesson again, thought a pink-haired girl, looking back towards the front of the room as she tried to focus on the lesson. ZZZZZZZZZZ, who wow, just Naruto again, ZZZZZZZ, thought a particularly lazy individual before returning to his sleep, deciding that whatever the blonde had planned, it was too troublesome to worry about at the moment. Wonder what mom packed for lunch. Maybe it's those pork buns again. Though a particularly good-natured boy who sat beside his sleeping friend, his hands ideally rubbing his protruding stomach as he continued to worry about lunch. Maybe if I show I'm strong like Itachi-san, I won't have to sit through these lessons anymore. If he doesn't stop that pounding, Hokage-san, or not, I'm going to hit him with my fireball, thought a black-haired boy who had a desperate urge to prove himself to everyone, his eyes narrowing back towards the titular blonde. I swear if he doesn't stop that pounding, I'm going to hop in his head and make him run around town in a dress, schemed a blonde-haired girl within her mind from where she sat beside her pink-haired friend. Maybe mom will let me bring Akamaru next time, at least then I will have something to do during these classes. Naruto's right, this is so boring, thought a feral-looking boy as he ideally scratched at one red-fanged cheek. Buzz, yes I know, buzz, don't worry, I'll be ready for it, a heavily clocked boy whispered as he continued to silently converse with the insects inside of his body. Haha, Oni-chan always does know how to sum up sensei's history lessons, silently giggled Naruto, her hand moving up to cup over her mouth as she smiled around at her sister, who seemed less amused about the situation. Baka Oni-chan, if you don't pay attention you are never going to get any stronger, thought an exasperated Minami, who shot her older sibling an annoyed look. Naruto-kun, you need to start listening or you aren't going to be able to pass. I'll have to talk to him later, even if he is right about Irika-sensei's lectures, thought Hinata as she looked at the blonde sitting to her left, her young face a mix of disapproval and amusement at her friend's actions. Board thud, board thud, board thud, hhhhhhhh, shouted Naruto as he suddenly burst into movement, leaping onto the top of his desk and as he slammed both his hands down into the baggy pockets of his orange jumpsuit. Every person in the class except for one particular sleeper now turned their attention towards the boy as he made his declaration. Boredom must die, die I say, death to boredom, roared the blonde as his hands re-emerged from his pockets, an almost manic smile now plastered across his face. As everyone's eyes saw that smile, a feeling of dread fell over them so that they almost failed to notice the two bright orange objects that Naruto had grasped in his hands. A split second later, both objects were loosed into the middle of the room, followed by a loud bang, and an ensuing river of orange in every direction. A moment after the blast, the whole classroom found itself dripping in orange paint, save for a few interesting exceptions. While most of the class had reacted by diving under their desks at the sight of the orange projectiles, or in the case of one redhead pulled under by her sister, there were two exceptions. The first being Iruka, who had been heading up the stairs towards the blonde at the time, and as a result was at ground zero, making him look as though he had stepped on an orange landmine, his whole form now dripping in a blanket of neon paint. The other victim was one, no longer sleeping, individual who was now plastered against the back wall of the classroom, slowly slipping down the wall even as he muttered to himself something about troublesome blondes. Naruto Uzumaki Namikes, shouted Iruka as he cleaned the paint from his eyes and cast his gaze around the room. However, Naruto was nowhere to be seen, only an open window and the distant sound of laughter to mark his escape. Naruto! Bellowed Iruka as he leapt out of the window after the blonde, the pair soon hurtling into the village as the remainder of the students watched them go. What the heck, why does he do stuff like this? Roared Sakura as she attempted to shake the orange paint from her books, casting annoyed looks around the destroyed classroom. Yeah, I mean, why can't he be more like Minami? Even Naruto never causes this kind of trouble, added Ino, looking across to where the sisters were emerging from below their desk. Hey, what is that supposed to mean, Ino? Fired off Naruto as Minami let out a sigh, shaking her head towards her sister. Relax, Naruto, Ino didn't mean anything by it, muttered Minami as she surveyed the damage to the classroom. Who cares, that was awesome, best history lesson, every laughed Kiba from the back of the room, bearing a toothy smile as he looked down at the class. But he trashed the lesson? Shouted Sakura, turning on the feral boy. Wasn't that much to trash if you asked me? Sighed Sasuke, looking out the window that the blonde had escaped through. What, but Sasuke, why would you say that? Questioned Sakura. 'Cause he's right, Oni-chan gave us the rest of the day off. Let's get out of here, cheered Naruto, giving Sakura her fox-like smile. Hey, that means a time for lunch, come on Shikamaru, called Choji as he pushed himself up, glancing around to his now neon friend. Hey Hinata, any idea where Oni-chan ran off to this time? Asked Minami, approaching the back of the room where the pale-eyed girl sat. Sorry Minami, I don't. We were going to meet up later for Hanabi and Mito to play, but that wasn't supposed to be until after class, replied the girl, watching as the redhead before her let out a sigh. Oh well, come on Minami, let's go find Kazan and get in some training, called Naruto happily as she moved towards the door, Minami turning away from Hinata and following after her. Okay Naruto, called Naruto, falling in behind her as the two moved out of the classroom. Meanwhile, within the village streets, the titular blonde was currently sprinting at top speed down the road, perused by a bright orange Iruka, the pair drawing several eyes as they darted around food stands and pedestrians alike. Ha, take that ninja history, you can't stop me now, laughed Naruto inside his mind as pair of voices added their own comments to his situation. Yeah, that was awesome, man, did you see the looks on their faces? Cheered an excited voice from within Naruto's head, causing the blonde to grin wider if that was possible. I swear Naruto, you never fail to amaze, do you, my little seedling? Added Jubi, a small giggle joining the happy laughter of the pair. Yeah, I know I'm awesome, thought Naruto as continued his race deeper into the village. Naruto! Shouted Iruka again, causing Naruto to shake himself back to reality. Oh/oh/oh, said all three voices at the same time. Come on legs, don't fail me now, shouted Naruto as he upped the pace. At the same time, a few blocks ahead of the pursuit, a red-headed woman dressed in a simple blue kimono was looking at the food in a stall, while also keeping an eye on the little redhead that was running around at her feet, smiling slightly to herself as she let her focus drift back towards that coming night. Now what should I make for dinner? Minato is coming home early to help with the girls, and Naruto is taking Mito to the Hyugas for a playdate, so I guess we could just go out. Kushin amused to herself as she moved back from the first stall, turning to continue her way down the street as her youngest rushed to keep up with her. As she moved through the market, her thoughts began to turn towards her only son, a small flicker of uneasiness accompanying her thoughts as they centered on the boy. It had been a little over a year since she had to ask him to hold off on his training yet again. With a small stab of regret, she remembered the look on his face when she had to tell him that the girl's training was not advancing as much as she had hoped, and that she was going to have him look after Mito while she worked with them. She wasn't originally thrilled with the idea, but Minato had reasoned that the sooner the girls were on the right track, the sooner they could focus on Naruto. After all, it was just one more year, no real harm there. She still had plenty of time, she continued to reason to herself as she watched her youngest moving ahead of her, giggling happily as she looked around the market. Besides, Mito and Naruto had bonded so close they were nearly inseparable whenever they were home, thought the woman, the sight of her youngest becoming another justification for her actions. Looking down, she smiled as Mito glanced up to her, violet eyes turning up into smiles that mirrored the one upon her lips. Her youngest was a mini-her in every way, from her long red hair to her violet eyes. At the moment, the child was dressed in a simple white dress that made her hair stand out all the more as she bounced around below her mother, a little ball of energy just like she had once been and like her son still was. Maybe I can talk to Minato about training Naruto sooner. I mean, it's not like it would mess things up all that much, she thought to herself as her thoughts turned back to her son. Just as she was thinking about asking Minato about her son, she felt a tug on her arm, drawing her out of her thoughts and down towards her daughter, who at that moment was bouncing up and down on the balls of her feet, pointing down the road, her mouth opening in an excited cry. "Onaizen, Naruto-Nisan, over here!" called Mito, waving her free hand in the air towards the oncoming figure, her red hair waving behind her as she practically wiggled with excitement. "Naruto?" questioned Kushina, looking towards the road. Wait, shouldn't he be in class? What would he be doing in town now? Did class let out early? She thought to herself as her eyes focusing ahead to where a small commotion was occurring. Just as she saw her son coming into view, she heard his name being yelled across the village, getting louder even as he got closer. "Naruto, stop now and get back her and take your punishment!" shouted Irika as he chased after the blonde. "You'll never take me alive, Irika. Your history lessons will not have me!" fired back Naruto as he continued to sprint unknowingly towards the pair of redheads. At hearing the voices of the two runners, a visible tick mark appeared on Kushina's head as her hair began to stand on end. "Naruto, what did you do this time?" she thought angrily to herself. Mito, meanwhile ignorant to her mother's anger, was laughing and trying to pull her mother forward towards her brother. As Naruto closed the distance, he faltered at seeing his mother and younger sister in front of him, the red hair of his mother already waving dangerously behind her. "Oh, you are in trouble now," laughed the voice in his head. "It was nice knowing you, seedling. I will always miss you," echoed the Jubi mockingly. "What should I do?" thought Naruto worriedly as his fellow voices paused for a moment before responding. "Surrender," suggested Jubi. "Pray to Kami," offered the voice. "Won't work, I know, Kami, they won't get involved with this," replied the Jubi. "Crud, well then we are doomed," said the voice a moment before Naruto reached his mother, or more accurately Kushina reached him, as he found himself wrapped up from head to toe in a familiar set of golden chains. "Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, what in the world are you doing out of class, and why is Irika chasing you through the village, and why?" Here she paused as she got a clear look at the bright orange Irika. For a full second Kushina simply blinked at the man before her anger cracked as another sound replaced her lecture. "PMFT. Hee laughed Kushina as she gazed at the bright orange Irika, her anger escaping into a fit of giggles at the poor Chunnin's expense. Mito in the meantime had fallen onto the ground giggling at the poor man, while smiling at her older brother who still stood bound in his golden prison beside her. Irika, for his part, could only look down at himself for a moment before chuckling along with the rest at the whole situation. After a few moments, when Kushina had regained her composure, she turned to face Irika once more, with a small grin still playing around her lips that she couldn't seem to shake. "Now, Irika, do you mind telling me why you have taken up my son's dress code and why you are chasing him throughout the village when he is supposed to be in class?" asked the redhead as Irika nodded to her, ideally whipping a bit of the paint from his face as he replied. "Sorry, Kushina-san, you see, Naruto here." At this he looked down at the still chained-up boy, decided that he would redecorate my classroom today, while I was in the middle of my lesson, finished Irika as the pair of adults looked down toward the blonde. "Lies and slander, I was framed, ask anyone, they'll tell you," Naruto began before a chain wrapped around his mouth, causing him to both fall silent and over on his side. As the blonde thumped to the street, Mito walking over, still giggling as she reached out to pat her brother's head as he looked up at her with pleading eyes to help him. "Naruto, you are in big trouble, mister. If we weren't already looking after your sisters tonight, you would be grounded for this," lectured Kushina in a scolding voice as she looked down at her son. You have to act more mature if you are ever going to be a proper shinobi databane. She continued, allowing her verbal tick to slip by due to her annoyance at the boy. Naruto in turn looked up into his mom's eyes, violet into his mix of blue and purple. After a moment his gaze dropped as he nodded his head at her words, allowing his body to go lax within the chains. Good, said Kushina, allowing the chains to resend back into her body, allowing Naruto to push himself back up. Even after rising, Naruto continued to look down at the ground, not wanting to look back up at his mother for fear of seeing her disappointment in him. Then he felt a hand on his head softly ruffling his hair, causing him to look up to see his mom smiling brightly at him. With that out of the way, nice going. With the paint, I bet the whole class looked hilarious. The redhead feeling a small warmth as she saw Naruto's face brightening at her praise. Even if she was angry at him for getting in trouble, her pranking nature could only be proud of her son's most recent action. He is so much like me, it's scary sometimes, thought Kushina to herself as she let her hand part from his golden locks. But don't go doing that again in class. She finished bopping him on the head for good measure. Yes, Kaa-san, Naruto said, looking up at his mom, while Mito took the opportunity to attach herself to Naruto's leg. He was happy that she had stopped being angry with him. Due to his interaction with Jubi, she had slowly developed a bit of a fear of angry women, and his mother was no exception. Kaa-san, can me and Nero Naizen go see Hanabi-kun and Hinata-chan now? Asked Mito, still bouncing up and down, looking between her mother and brother. The three others looked at Mito's smiling face, before turning back at each other, eyes shifting to Irika, who let out a small sigh as he looked down at himself. Well, I guess I have to go back to the classroom and see if I can get some people help me clean it up. Maybe the Hokage can give me a small D rank to help speed it up, muttered the man as Kushina focused upon her children. Well, said Kushina, looking down at her son and daughter, okay, but you to be back after dinner with them, okay? I don't want you wandering around town without us. Finished the redhead as Mito exploded into movement. Yay! Thanks, Kassen! Yelled Mito, happily dragging Naruto off towards the Hyuga compound. As the two faded slowly into the distance, Kushina could only shake her head with a small smile on her face, as her thoughts to once again return to Naruto's training. Maybe we should wait till he moves out of this pranking phase before we get him into training. Wouldn't want him getting hurt by not taking things seriously, she thought to herself, unknowingly taking another step away from her son in the process. Meanwhile, Mito was still dragging Naruto towards the Hyuga compound, her little face lit up with obvious excitement as they sped down the winding streets. Slow down, Mito, Hanabi isn't going to disappear before we get there, called Naruto, even as the little redhead continued to drag him ahead as though she hadn't heard him. Hey, Onaizen, Oni-chan, over here, called a voice from ahead of them just as the pair entered into another street. At the call, both siblings turned to see Naruto and Minami approaching them down the street, Naruto waving as she came. Wanchin Yuko, Wanchin Mina, Mito called, waving at her sisters with her free hand as she changed direction, now dragging Naruto towards their other siblings. Hey, Squirt, said Naruto, rubbing the top of Mito's head as she got close enough, causing Mito to playfully slap at her hand while giggling. Hey Mito, why are you with Naruto? I thought you were going to be shopping with Kassen today, asked Minami as she glanced down at her sister. I was, but Nero Naikin and the Orange Man found us. Now we are headed over to Hanabi's, called Mito, smiling up at the darker redhead who looked momentarily puzzled. Orange Man, oh right, Irika, muttered Minami as her gaze shifted to Naruto. That reminds me, Naruto, what were you thinking doing that in class? Asked the girl as Naruto gave a small shrug. What, Irika's lessons was so boring, all I did was get us all out of there easily, you should be thanking me. He smiled back, his words causing Naruto to chuckle a little, nodding in agreement. Naruto, you need to pay attention in class or you won't be able to become a good shinobi, continued Minami in a slightly annoyed tone as her thoughts turned to her growing irritation with her brother. Geez, Onaizen, if you don't start taking things seriously, you're going to get yourself hurt out there. Gah, how can you be so blind to it, you baka? I don't want to see you hurt, she thought to herself as she watched Naruto looking down at Mito, who was excitedly asking all about the paint prank. Meanwhile, Naruto was having her own mental debate as she looked at her little sister holding on to her brother's hand. Why doesn't Mito ever look at me like that? I mean, I know that she and Naruto spend a lot of time together because of our training, but I'm awesome and stronger than him, so why doesn't she look up to me like she does to him? I want to be her hero too, she thought, allowing her focus to slowly shift back to reality. Hey Squirt, what do you say that after my training I take you out for some ice cream, just you and your Wanchin? How does that sound? Asked Naruto, hopefully looking down at the little redhead. At her words, Mito looked up at her, adopting a thinking pose, which with her age made a cute little picture to be sure. I can't, Yuko Onaikin, Nero Onaizen and I are going to Hanabi's, she said, smiling up at her sister, ignorant of the touch of sadness moving across her sister's face. "God, it's always Onaizen this or Naruto that. Come on, Mito, I'll show you how much better I am than him, and then you'll be proud of your big sis too," she thought to herself as a dark little seed began to take root in the young blonde's mind. Meanwhile, Minami was watching the exchange between her siblings with a thoughtful look upon her face. If Mito keeps hanging around with Naruto all the time, I'm worried she will start to act like him with that carefree, trusting attitude. I don't want to see Mito get herself overlooked for training like Naruto because she picks up on his bad habits. I mean, why else would Kassen and Tusen be leaving him out? Thought the redhead as she shook herself back from her thoughts. Okay, well, we have to get back home and start training with Ka-san. See you two later, okay? Said Minami as she turned, leading Naruto away, who gave the pair a small glance with just a hint of jealousy as the two moved away. Okay, see you guys later, called Naruto, missing the subtle change in his sister. Bayuko by Neru waved Mito, still smiling, after them before returning to dragging her brother towards the Hyuga compound. Later at the Hyuga compound we find Naruto and Hinata standing on a small wooden outcropping to the main house beside the chair-bound Hitomi, watching Hanabi try and fail to stay ahead of Mito as she chased him throughout the gardens of the Hyuga compound. "Go get him, Imato, he can't run forever," chuckled Naruto as he watched the two chase each other around. "Naruto-kun, don't pick on Hanabi," stated Hinata, looking over at the blonde, who smiled nervously at her. "Oh, course, Hinata," chuckled the boy, his reply drawing a small smile to Hitomi's face among several others. "Ah, does the big bad Hinata-chan scare little Naruto?" giggled Jubi. Hey, two voices responded, drawing even more giggles from the purple-haired woman. "Not funny, Jubi, you know she can be scary when she is angry. Remember when Naruto stole her cinnamon bun that one time?" threw Naruto. "Yes, she couldn't lift her arm for a whole day after that," agreed the other voice. At the same time, outside of Naruto's mind, Hitomi turned her smile from the elder children as she watched her son running for his freedom and sanity from Mito. She loved how Naruto and Hinata had started setting up these little get-togethers between Hanabi and Mito, these times being some of the few she felt her son was getting to be the child he was instead of the heir Hayashi seemed intent to make him. Ever since Naruto and Hinata had met all those years ago at the park, they had become the closest of friends. Together he and Hinata had managed to overcome much of her shyness. Although she was still a soft-spoken and kind young girl, she now had a strong will to defend both herself and those she cared for. Naruto had given her that, and for that Hitomi would always be grateful. On top of that, he kindly brought Mito over to help Hanabi have a childhood. Once Hanabi had been born, Hayashi had dedicated more and more time to training his new son, always bragging about how he was training the next great master of the gentle fist. With that came intense training, followed by lessons on educate, everything a growing future clan had needed, but not what she wanted for her child. Then Naruto and Hinata had become friends, and with them came Mito. The little redhead becoming a breath of fresh air to the Hyuga compound, allowing Hanabi, whether he realized it or not, to be the child she wished him to be, at least for a time. Speaking of children, Hitomi could not help but giggle as she saw her son get tackled to the ground by Mito in the game of tag they were playing, before the redhead leapt up, darting away before the Hyuga boy could right himself. "Okay kids, it's time to get ready to eat. Naruto, would you mind going and getting Mito and Hanabi for me?" asked Hitomi as she looked across at the blonde. "Sure, Hyuga-san," replied Naruto as a branch member approached to wheel Hitomi back into the home. "Come on, Hinata, let's go save your brother before he decides to take this chase into town," smiled the blonde, hopping off of the porch and offering a hand to Hinata to follow after him. Yeah," she replied as a blush moved across her face, even as she took the offered hand. They found Hanabi a moment later, having been cornered up a tree by Mito as she ran around the bottom of it, yelling at him to come down. "Well, looks like you have treed a Hyuga there, Amato," laughed Naruto as Mito turned to him, smiling wildly at his words. "Hanabi, come down, it's time to get ready for dinner," called Hinata up to the trapped boy, who gave her a worried look. "Promise me you won't let her get me Onizen," called Hanabi down a moment later, causing both Naruto and Hinata to sweat drop before looking at Mito, wondering what the young girl could be doing to scare the boy so much. It didn't help that Mito at the moment had a grin that spread from ear on her face, only adding to the boy's worry. "Have I mentioned recently how much I love your little sister?" chuckled Jubi as Naruto gave a mental sigh. "Okay, I promise, Amato, now come on down," called Hinata, gesturing with her arms for Hanabi to come down. Once the boy was finally down, and both of the younger children were off getting ready, it was only Naruto and Hinata out in the garden, the pale-eyed girl looking nervously towards her oldest friend as she steeled herself to speak. "Hey Naruto," whispered Hinata, finally mustering the courage to speak. "Yeah, Hinata, what is it?" questioned Naruto, turning around to face her, noticing her slight worry as he did. Earlier in class, you need to start paying attention. I don't want to see you get held back, she said with concern evident in her voice as she looked up towards her friend. Don't worry, Hinata, I'm going to be the greatest shinobi of the leaf. There's no way I will get held back, Databeo, replied Naruto, raising one arm in victory as Hinata continued to look slightly worried. But Naruto, you need to work to get better. Why don't you go and ask your parents for training again? Asked Hinata, knowing that Naruto hadn't spoke of his family's training for months. At her words, Naruto seemed to pause for a moment, as though his mind had momentarily gone away before he focused back on her. Hinata, I've told you they have to train my sisters for now. I'll get my training, I just have to wait a bit more. Besides, Naruto and Minami need to learn to use the fox or they could get hurt. If that means I have to wait, then that's just what I have to do. Being selfish isn't going to help me get any better. He finished as he looked across to the girl, who still did not look convinced. Hinata could only frown slightly at her friend's words. Naruto seemed to trust his family so much that he wouldn't hear a word against them. It made her worry. Still, his parents were the Hokage, as well as a former A-class ninja. They had to know what was best, right? I guess, Naruto, but please will you promise me to train some, just so you're ready when it's time for their training? She said, looking full into Naruto's face, right into his eyes that so resembled the sunset ocean. Naruto found a little heat rushing to his face as he gazed back into her lavender-tinted eyes, his lips moving before his mind seemed to have any say in the matter. Okay, Hinata, I'll start working harder, I promise, and I always keep my promises, Databeo. He finished with his usual gusto, drawing a small smile to the girl's lips that caused him to smile all the more. Hey, tell her to join in, called Jubi out of nowhere. What, why? Thought Naruto in reply. Because I said so, Naruto, now get your butt in gear and ask her. Fired back Jubi as Naruto felt a small mental shove from the woman. But Jubi, why? I mean, sure, Hinata is great, but why have us train with her? Asked the other voice as he too received a mental shove of his own. Just do it, you knuckleheads! Shouted Jubi as Naruto sprang back into reality, even as both he and the other voice nodded in unison towards the purple-haired woman. Hey Hinata, how about you train with me, just the two of us, so that we can get stronger together? Smiled Naruto, not even realizing what he sounded like to the poor girl. Naruto and I alone, together, out in a secluded training field, where we might eat, thought Hinata, her mind taking a hard right turn before she knew it, and with that the poor girl fainted, falling face forward into the unsuspecting Naruto. As a result, Hinata Hyuga unknowingly took the blonde Uzumaki to the ground with her, now pressed beneath her small form. What she would also did not know was that the way she had fallen, she had unintentionally given her first kiss to Naruto at the same time. Hinata's lips soft were Naruto's last thoughts before he too fell into unconsciousness at the sudden contact. Aishidea, added the voice as it too fell silent. This left Jubi alone to nearly fall out of her tree, laughing at the whole situation. I freaking love these kids. She laughed even as she continued to roll around in the shade of her tree. Facing your fears. As the first rays of light crested over the horizon, they found themselves falling across the slumbering village of Konohana, slowly illuminating the Hokage monument, as well as the orange-clad figure that stood astride the top of the third Hokage's head. The blonde figure stood silently gazing down upon the village as the first rays of the new day began to reach across it. The last 4 years had been trying for our young hero, yet despite the hardships he had managed to persevere in the face of what his life had slowly become. As his eyes scanned the village below, he was able to make out in the distance the rooftop of his own home, where no doubt at this very moment his sisters and parents were just rubbing the sleep from their eyes and preparing for the day ahead of them. As his thoughts turned towards his family, he could not help feeling a sense of regret at the last 4 years he had spent with them, and all the times he had been forced to let himself fade into the backdrop of their lives. But such was the cost of his conviction, his faith. Flashback. It was now the triplets' 9th birthday, and Naruto was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. It was finally time. He had waited and waited, but he was finally going to get to start his training with his sisters. As he hurried to throw on a simple set of orange pants and a white t-shirt with the Uzumaki swirl in bright red on the back, he glanced around to see his own smiling face looking back at him from the mirror across from him. A blonde boy looked back at him, both swirling blue and purple eyes turned up with his lips into a look of excitement. The few years of aging had done little for his growth, though his now regular training with his best friend Hinata had allowed him to slowly lose the traces of baby fat that still clung to him only a few years previously. Aside from this, the only real change to come over him was the gradual lengthening of his hair, so that it now sat much like his father's, the spiky mess waving around his head as his face looked unhappily at his reflection. Today's the day. I'm going to start up my training and become the greatest shinobi that the leaf has ever known, Databeo. The blonde practically roared within his mind as he finished pulling on his clothing just as a voice he knew well spoke for only his ears. Yes, we heard you the first 100 times, seedling. Though knowing you we're in for another 100. Responded Jubi, shaking her head even as a small smile played across her lips. Naruto had not been the only one to be looking forwards to this day. She had sat with just as much anticipation all year while helping to guide her young host. Ideally, her thoughts turned to why she privately prayed she was wrong to doubt his family, even as flashes of the blonde boy's life availed themselves before her midnight eyes. Over the past year, she had watched helpless to do more than comfort him as he had seen his sisters surpass him in class, surpass him in ability, and surpass him in the love of his parents, each another wound to the boy's heart. He may have been able to fool his parents, even his sisters, but Jubi knew that the boy was tearing himself apart inside over slowly falling away from them, and along with that pain grew another's anger. Yo, we told you, Jubi, all we had to do was wait, and now we're going to learn all of these awesome justice. Hey, don't forget to learn them well, we want to be the best ever. Called another voice from inside the boy's mind, also teeming with excitement at the coming training. Right. Well, let's go. Called the exited blonde as he spun out of his room and into the hall beyond, starting down the stairs before his bedroom door had a chance to close behind him. As Naruto reached the bottom floor, he turned towards the sitting room only to be nearly bowled over by a small red missile that slammed into his gut with an excited cry of greeting. Aniki! Called Mito as planted herself into his chest, turning her smiling face up at him as her red bangs fell across her smiling cheeks. Happy birthday, Aniki! Giggled the little red-headed terror, still smiling happily up at her brother, her little arms looped around him so that she hung slightly off of the wooden floors of the landing. Hey, Mito! Naruto responded as his breath returned to him, ideally reaching down to return the embrace of his youngest sister, causing her to let out a giggle as she pulled herself closer to him. So Mito, where is everyone? The party is going to get started soon. Asked the boy as Mito pulled back from her death grip on him, blinking a pair of violet eyes up to him as she adopting a thinking pose. Neru and Mina Nizan are still getting ready, but Kassen and Tusan said they needed private time and I had to wait out here. Replied the girl, finally allowing Naruto to slip out of her grip so that the little redhead now stood before him, still smiling as she looked up at him. Wonder why they didn't want Mito with them, must be something really important, thought Naruto as he allowed himself to be slowly pulled forwards into the sitting room, passing down a small hall, the walls covered in smiling photographs of the family in various states of happiness. I say we go and check it out, maybe it's about our training or about some cool secret mission, called the other voice within the boy's mind as its partner voiced her own opinion of the news. I guess it wouldn't be a horrible idea to take a quick listen. After all, you are going to be a shinobi, and intelligence gathering is going to help you out in that regard. Jubi added, her tone hinting at a bit of curiosity herself. Great, then Operation Eavesdrop is a go, Naruto thought, allowing a look of mischief to spread across his face as he arrived in the sitting room, his gaze traveling over to the hall that leads to his parents' room. But first, how to distract Mito. She may be many things, but silent was not one of them. Heck, that was one of the few reasons that Hanabi was still able to give the little girl the slip. That, and he had managed to activate his Bikugan at the amazing age of 3 thanks to her constant concussive greetings. Hayashi had been so pleased at his son's accomplishment, he had spent the following week bragged it was due to his excellent training, and showed how well Hanabi was suited to the position of future heir to anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, Hitomi, Naruto, and Hinata had chuckled knowing he had only activated it in an attempt to escape Mito's chasing him one day during their games of tag. The memory of Hanabi suddenly throwing himself to the ground as Mito fly clear over him into one of the garden's ponds still brought smiles to the three's faces when they recalled the small boy's excitement as he looked up to see the socked girl turning to him, a look of surprise plastered across her face along with her matted red hair. Hey Mito, could you wait for me out here? I'm going to go check on Kazan and Tusan, but I'll be right back, promise. Smiled Naruto as Mito turned to blink up at him for a moment. At his words, Mito's face slowly took on a pouting look, her little arms crossing before her as she looked up at the blonde. Well, I don't think she's too interested, seedling, chuckled Jubi as Mito slowly dropped her arms. Okay, Aniki, murmured the little girl as she made her way over to pull herself onto the couch. As she began to heave herself onto the cushions, she felt a pair of arms helping her up, turning to see Naruto smiling softly down at her. Despite herself, Mito found a smile working across her face as she soon was back to her smiling self as Naruto stepped back. Okay, Aniki, but you better be right back, called Mito, her voice once again carrying a happy tone as she suddenly became interested in adjusting her white party dress. Same old Amato, chuckled Naruto to himself, as he made his way down the hall towards his parent room as quietly as he could, sliding forwards until he stood just outside their room. Pressing his ear to the wall of the room, he was just able to make out the sound of voices from inside. So Minato, what do you think we should start Naruto on? I was thinking of starting him with taijutsu, or do you think chakra control would be better? Asked Kushina from where she sat facing her cabinet mirror, fixing her hair so that a single red ponytail fell forward over her chest, framing the back of her head in an elegant cascade of silken hair. What was that, Kushina? Called Minato from the connecting bathroom as he stepped out, one towel wrapped around his body while the other was currently being used to dry his hair, muffling his reply slightly. Turning with a slightly annoyed look on her face, Kushina saw as the towel dropped from her husband's head as she repeated her question. I said, what do you think we should start Naruto on now that his training is going to get started? Asked the redhead just as Minato was turning towards the armoire that held his clothing. As her words fell across the small gap between them, Minato came to a halt as his blue eyes slowly widening as he bit back a silent curse. In truth, he had been dreading this moment ever since he had said to hold off the boys' training the previous year, and from that dread he had allowed his time to run out. Now he stood here on the very day his dread only matched by the cold reality of what now faced him. He could only hope that his wife would see things his way and that maybe his son could forgive him for what he was about to do. Swallowing slightly, Minato turned to face his wife, his face set even as his mind recalled that fateful day, knowing that since then that this day would come. Flashback. It was the day of his children's 5th birthday, 5 years since he had been given the 3 greatest gifts he could ever imagine. Smiling slightly to himself, the blond man's eyes drifted over a happy photo of his family, the children standing around their seated mother, as he looked over them all looking out happily from the glass frame. Shaking himself slightly, Minato turned back to his work, eager to get through the reports on his desk, glancing every once in a while at the 2 shadow clones that were also digging through the paperwork that had accumulated, hurrying to get done so he could be with his family. Note to self: thank Kushina again for suggesting shadow clones, he smiled to himself. As we watched the work progress, eyes glancing to a clock that hung across from him showing the hands just striking noon. As his eyes dropped back to his work, the sound of a window opening behind him caused him to smile slightly as he turned to greet the only man who chose that particular way of entering his office. Hey there, Minato, how's the big chair treating you? Joked Jiraiya as he stepped down from the windowsill, the small wind from the open window jostling his mat of white hair as he turned his older face towards the Hokage. Not too bad, sensei, just getting some more work done before I head home. You know the triplets are going to be turning 5, and Kushina and I were thinking of getting the 3 started on some of the basics so they would be ready for the academy next year. Oh, and you better be there tonight or Tsunade's going to track you down and drag you there. Smiled the blonde Hokage as he set down his pen, watching as Jiraiya moved slowly around to take one of the large seat that sat just before the Hokage's desk. That's so, kid, well then it's a good thing I got here when I did, replied the Toad Sage, leaning forward slightly as his face became slightly more serious. Why is that? Asked Minato with a note of curiosity towards his sensei, as he took in the shift in his sensei's words. Well, you see, Gaki, you remember about the great Toad Sage? Replied Jiraiya, looking straight into the younger man's eyes as Minato paused for a moment to think back to his days learning with his sensei. Yes, the one responsible for laying down the prophecies, right? Wasn't his last one just before the beginning of the Third War? Asked Minato as Jiraiya nodded slightly. That's right, he tried to warn us about the whole thing, even gave us a hint as to Whirlpool's destruction. If we'd been willing to listen to him, we might have even stopped the village from falling. Sighed the sage as he shook himself slightly, focusing back on the Hokage. But anyway, the point is he's made another prophecy, kid. A prophecy that concerns your children. Finished Jiraiya as Minato looked slightly shocked. Another prophecy? Wait, you said it was about my kids, how could you be sure? What was it? Asked the blonde Hokage as a small amount of worry began to enter into his voice. Easy, kid, the prophecy said a great evil will descend upon the ninja world, and that two who share a great burden with the blood of my student, and the blood of the leaf will be the ones to determine the world's fate. It went on to say that the two would either stand side by side and together join their power to vanquish the darkness, or one would fall, and the remaining one would then have a choice to either save or damn the ninja world. Finished Jiraiya with a firm look on his face as across from him Minato looked slightly horrified. Wait, what do you mean one may fall? Are you telling me one of my children is going to die? Shouted Minato, knocking his chair to the floor as he rose, towering over the sage, eyes blazing as his hands curled into fists. As Minato began to let off waves of anger, Jiraiya lifted his hands up in a play-acting manner as he continued. No, kid, remember what it said before that. If they combine their power, then they will save the world, no problem. Your family will be fine as long as we don't ignore the prophecy. Replied the sage, waved both his hands in front of himself as if to shield himself from the blonde's rage. As Minato relaxed slightly, he bent down and repositioned his chair, allowing himself a moment of quiet as his mind focused on his sensei's words. Okay, calm down, Minato, panicking won't help you here. So two of my children will be the ones from the prophecy that should cover the blood of the student that was spoken of. Okay, fine. As for blood of the tree, Well, that's easy after all this is Konoha, so that's easy, so that leaves the last hint sharing a burden. He thought to himself as he slowly repositions his chair, sinking into it a moment later as his attention returned to his sensei. So you think this prophecy is referring to my daughter's Jiraiya? Stated Minato quietly as he thought back to the Kyuubi attack, and the sealing that took place, the final clues snapping into place as he finished speaking. That's about the long and short of it, kid. They fit all of the parameters of the prophecy. I mean, what is a greater burden than the freaking Kyuubi? And unless you have your son secretly building up his own village, it has to be them. He replied confidently, smiling a little as he attempted to lighten the mood. Okay, so what do we do? I mean, the prophecy says that one can fall unless they stand together. How are we going to make sure that doesn't happen? Asked Minato as he looked across at his sensei. I don't know, kid. All I can think of is to keep an eye on them and make sure that they can work well together, without any distractions. Just make them the best we can and have faith in them and the prophecy, replied Jiraiya as Minato nodded slightly. I suppose that's all we can do. Well, Kushina and I can handle that just fine. I'm sure the kids won't have any trouble working together. Besides, it's not like we weren't already planning on making them the best shinobi and kunoichi they could be. Smiled Minato, some of the worry leaving him as he considered how to break the news to Kushina that night. What about Naruto? Asked Jiraiya, breaking the blonde's train of thought as he looked back to the sage. What about Naruto? What do you mean, sensei? Asked Minato as he saw the sage shifting slightly as though he was suddenly uncomfortable. Ah, hell, he doesn't see what I'm talking about. Should have figured things wouldn't go smoothly, thought the sage as he prepared for the coming backlash, one he had been preparing for ever since he heard of the prophecy. What I mean, kid, is that we have to focus on Naruto and Minami, or else we risk messing up the prophecy and losing them. The two who carry the burden, not three, kid, replied Jiraiya, looking back into his student's eyes, as comprehending dawned on them. For a moment Minato simply stared at the man across him as his hands unconsciously began to grip his armrest, causing the wood to splinter beneath his grip. Sensei, you better not be asking me what I think you are, replied Minato with a mounting feeling of anger and dread fought for control of his mind. Across from him Jiraiya remained steady as he looked back into his student's eyes. Look, kid, this isn't going to be easy, but you have to think as a Hokage with this. If we risk your daughters, then we also risk losing the village. Hell, we risk the whole world. Whatever else happens, we have to make sure your daughters are ready for what is coming, replied Jiraiya, his tone almost hollow as he continued to speak. We have to make sure that Naruto and Minami stand together, and we can't risk messing that up. I don't have Naruto, Minato, and neither do you, but he could mess their training up even if he doesn't mean to. What if Naruto and Naruto started to get closer than Minami and Naruto? Those two are already so much alike, you can't tell me it couldn't happen. Or what if Minami and Naruto surpass Naruto? You know she takes longer to learn things than them. If he is part of the training, we risk too much, finished Jiraiya solemnly. So we throw him out in the cold. You're asking me to neglect my son for the sake of, began Minato as his voice rose into an angry cry that was cut short by his sensei's own. For the sake of everyone, kid, including him, cut in Jiraiya, interrupting Minato and standing up from his seat. If this prophecy plays out and we lose one of your girls, we could lose the whole world. What will it matter if your son didn't feel left out if everyone dies? Damn it, kid, I don't like this either, but we have a choice, the world or your son, and I'm not going to lose the world for one kid who we would lose anyway, shouted Jiraiya as Minato felt his heart stopping as a flash of a flaming city light up his mind, the smiling faces of his family now haunted looks and all he loved forever lost to him. Minato could only look at the face of his sensei and realize what he was saying, his fear slowly worming its way into his mind as he felt the fight leaving him. What would it matter in the end if Naruto was happy if it cost them the world? Besides, it wasn't like he would abandon his son, right? It would just be training. He could always do it later once the girls were closer. No harm in waiting. The third left you to protect this village, and sometimes that means making tough decisions. You knew that when you put on that hat you owe it to everyone in this village to do what is right. Though his eyes drifting down to photo on his desk, the smiles he swore to protect. Okay, Jiraiya, you're right. We will just have to make it up to Naruto once the girls are strong enough in their training, replied Minato sadly as he looked back into his sensei's face. I'm sorry, kid, I know it's hard, kid, but it will all work out. I'll be stopping by every once in a while to help train the kids with you. You'll see everything will be alright in the end. I promise, replied the sage as he smiled sadly. Neither man spoke for the next few minutes, the weight of what they had decided resting upon their shoulders. They were starting down a path with the intention of saving everyone they loved. But good intentions have often paved the way to the Shinigami, and this would be no exception. Flashback end. As the memories of that fateful day flashed before Minato's eyes, he steadied himself for the argument he knew was coming, his resolve as solid as stone as he pushed forwards intent on protecting his future. Well, Kushina, I have been giving it some thought recently, and I'm not so sure that Naruto is really ready to start his training with the girls, replied Minato, his words catching Kushina off guard as he blinked at him a few times before her eyes narrowed dangerously as they focused on Minato. Excuse me? She whispered in a dangerous tone, as she looked across at Minato, who had not looked away from her. Would you mind saying that one more time, honey? Because it sounded like you were asking us to hold off on training our son after he has waited for 2 years to start? After we promised that he could start this year. She continued, allowing her anger to flood off of her as she spoke. Despite the fear he felt at the moment Minato steadied himself, he had dreaded this, but he would not back down when things got tough. He was the Hokage, and he would not be dissuaded so easily, even as a small part of him hoped he might be. I'm saying, Kushina, that we both know that Naruto is still pranking and causing trouble all the time in class. He isn't showing a real aptitude towards any area of being a shinobi yet. If we start him now, it will take both of us looking after him just to make sure that he is properly looked after, answered Minato as Kushina continued to glare up towards him. If we were to bring him into the training now, all we would be doing is taking all of the attention away from Naruto and Minami, and both of them are getting into the advanced levels of their training. Leaving them now is dangerous, he continued, even as he felt his own heart slowly hardening. Oh, you mean like how we have been training them without him for the past 2 years, Minato, or did you forget that little detail? How is it fair to neglect Naruto for them? Shot back Kushina, now rising to her feet. Be that as it may, we can't fix that by damaging Miname's and Naruto's training just so that Naruto doesn't feel left out. Kushina, the girls have a burden that Naruto doesn't. We need to make sure that they are looked after, Minato replied, holding his ground as Kushina advanced upon him. Oh, so we just leave him out in the cold, is that your answer, O wise Hokage? Not even a clone cause its dispersal messes up our training, quoted Kushina, throwing Minato's reason for the absence of clones along with one of her fingers that she jabbed into his chest. Swallowing slightly, Minato looked down to his wife as he replied. Kushina, what happened to you when you were a Jinchuriki of the village? Whispered Minato quietly, his tone solemn as he felt a stab of guilt using his wife's own past against her. At his words, Kushina stepped back as though she had been slapped, her mouth opening and closing as it failed to form words. The memories of her near-successful kidnapping flashed before her eyes. Seeing her uncertainty, Minato pressed his advantage, his tone carefully controlled. At this moment, both Naruto and Minami are in the same kind of danger you were. They are not only Jinchuriki, but also my children. Kumo tried to steal the Byakugan by kidnapping Hitomi's daughter just a few years back. This is a real danger to them, and they need to be ready because we are sending them out into a world with a bullseye painted on them, he continued as Kushina began to shake herself back to reality. Boo, but Kushina began to reply, only for Minato to press on. We can't risk them not being ready for this world we live in, even if that means that Naruto will have to wait a bit longer for training. Kushina, we knew they would be in danger for carrying the Kyuubi just like you were, and I don't want to see them ever having to suffer like you did, continued Minato, as he walked forward, wrapping his arms around Kushina as he did so, feeling her body shiver under his hold. But Naruto, whispered Kushina, struggling to speak in her shaky voice, eyes slowly turning up to Minato. He doesn't have the Kyuubi in him, Kushina, and the Uzumaki bloodline doesn't show visible signs like Mito and Minami, so he is even less danger. He's our son, but he isn't a target like the girls are, replied Minato in a soothing voice as Kushina's mind continued to swirl, the fear seizing hold of her inch by inch. Besides, it's not like we are going to abandon him. Once the girls are ready, we can start his training up with Mito, and with both of us it won't take long before he's an amazing shinobi. Even Naruto and Minami can help us if we want. He'll have all of us there for him, right? He finished with a small smile, offering Kushina the hope she needed to escape her growing fears. Promise me, whispered Kushina in a hushed voice as her shaking slowly died away. Promise me he will be okay, Minato, promise me that we're doing the right thing for him, pleaded the woman, privately praying her husband would stop himself here even as the realization of what she was going to be asking of her son settled down on her. I promise, Kushina, we will do whatever we have to in order to protect them all. Now let's get ready for them, we have a party to attend after all, and we can't go ruining it for them by being sad, smiled Minato, not knowing that Naruto was just then having his world crumble down around him. Outside of the parents' room, Naruto stood frozen as he finished listening to his parents talking, his arms pushing him slightly away from the wall, his body moving as if in a trance as he slowly turned to pad slowly down the hall back the way he had come. But why? They said I would start this year. Sure, Naruto and Minami need attention, but what about me? They told me if I waited I would get training too. It's not fair. Why are they asking me to wait even longer? What am I supposed to do now? Thought Naruto, as he slowly made his way down the hall, his feet soon crossing into the sitting room as his mind continued to swirl. Seedling, I'm so sorry. I know how much this must be hurting you, but you need to stay strong. The world's not always fair, but you can't let this beat you. Consoled the Jubi as she watched the boy, her own thoughts privately cursing herself for being right about the parents all along. But he has been waiting for 2 years, it's not fair. Why are they asking him to wait even longer? What's wrong with them? Why are Naruto and Minami so important? Yelled the other member of their trio as his mentally raged within their linked minds. I don't know, but the fact is that there isn't anything we can do about it. Well, we could show up the girls, show them my youngest isn't much compared to his mom, added Jubi as the other voice slowly fell into a set of anger mutters. Don't blame Minami and Naruto, please, it's okay. Came the soft thoughts of Naruto, causing both voices to suddenly pause. What? Came both of their replies, only receiving silence as an answer. Naruto, what do you mean it's okay? You can't actually believe that this is okay. They broke their promise to you again. How much longer are you going to defend them? You can't keep letting yourself suffer for them, called Jubi with a hint and desperation in her voice that finally drew a reply from the boy. I'm not Jubi. This caught the other two speakers' attention. But I can't hate them for wanting to look after my sisters either, he continued as both voices fell silent. I know what they are doing isn't fair, but it's like you said, Jubi, life isn't always fair, and I guess I'm just not as important to them as my sisters are, replied the blonde, allowing small tears to form on the sides of his eyes. Seedling, whispered Jubi worriedly as Naruto shook himself, forcing his tears back as he spoke next. I won't let this beat me though. I will keep training to protect them, and keep my promise, even if I don't have their help, continued Naruto as he slowly began to pull himself back together. Maybe you should leave the village to train somewhere else, or hey, why not go and join another village? That would show them for treating you like this, suggested the other voice as Naruto shook his head in irritation. What, are you crazy? If I did that, who would look after Mito? And what would happen if I did join another village, and had to fight Hinata, or my friends? And besides that, where would I go? I don't even know where the other hidden villages are, replied Naruto as the other voice fell silent. As much as I hate to say it, I have to agree with Naruto on this. If he were to leave, no doubt they would send shinobi to find him, and even if he did make it to another hidden village, that old Toad spy network would be able to find him and bring him back. That if they didn't just ransom him off back to Konoha, agreed Jubi as the other voice let out an angry huff. But he has to do something. They're abandoning him, argued the voice. I will, Naruto replied, causing his fellows to fall silent. I'll keep training with Hinata, and get strong enough to keep my promise. I'll even protect my family whether they like it or not. And when I do get my training from them, I'll show them just how strong I can be so that they will have to see they were wrong to leave me behind, finished the blonde as a small silence greeted his words. Ga, you're stubborn. Okay, then I won't fall behind either, so you better watch out, Naruto, shouted the voice as Naruto mentally nodded towards its source. Okay, Seedling, we'll do this your way, whispered Jubi even as Naruto blinked back to reality to see Mito seated between Naruto and Minami, all three laughing happily as the older pair messed with the tiny redhead. As his view fell on the three, Naruto felt a small smile play across his face despite everything he had learned. He may have been angry at his family at the moment, but it just wasn't in him to hate them. He loved them so dearly, and in a way that is why this most recent betrayal hurt the most. Ideally, his thoughts returned to something Kushina had once told him, of how being an Uzumaki meant protecting your family, even when you may not always want to. Smiling softly to himself, nodding as his thoughts turned to those words. He was Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, and from now on, and he was going to show the world just what that meant. Flashback end. Now standing upon the Hokage monument some 4 years after that decision, Naruto Uzumaki stood looking down upon the village, his face with a look of grim determination as he drew in a deep breath of the new day. Okay, no turning back after this, he said to himself as he felt the small touch of excitement creeping over him. I just want you to know, Seedling, that whatever happens, it has been my pleasure to know you. Godspeed, Seedling, spoke Jubi, adopting a salute from her seat in the limbs of her tree, a firm look upon her face that drew a smile to the boy's lips. Remember, all of your training has prepared you for this day. Make us proud, and show those bakas how an Uzumaki does things, said Naruto's other confidant in a cheerful tone. As the second speaker finished, a small movement announced the presence of the second person upon the cliff face a moment before she spoke. Now, Naruto-kun, are you sure this isn't going too far? Asked Hinata, stepping forward to stand beside him on the head of the third Hokage, the wind blowing out her blue Heim-styled hair as she turned her paled eyes to the blonde beside her. Trust me, Hinata-chan, this is going to be the greatest thing we have ever done. Just think what Hanabi and Nito will think of it. Besides, we spent all night working on it. I can't let all our hard work go to waste," replied Naruto, placing a hand on the poor girl's shoulder and giving it a light squeeze for comfort. "Hi, I guess you're right, and I do think they will like it. Kassen will too," smiled Hinata as she looked out into the village where her compound stood. Both teens stood there for a few more moments looking out on the city as Hinata allowed her thoughts to travel back over the past 4 years that had led to her standing beside Naruto upon the stone Hokage. Flashback. Naruto and Hinata were sitting together in a special classroom after the academy had let out with a few of their fellow students, including Sakura and Ino, waiting for their teacher to arrive, the pair ideally chatting away from the rear of the class. After deciding to train together, Hinata had been looking for a way to get Naruto's spirits back up after she had heard that his parents had pushed back his training yet again. So when she heard that they were going to start having extra classes on becoming medical ninja, she thought it was the perfect opportunity to get Naruto back to his happy self. Especially after she had explained that neither of his sisters would be able to do it due to their huge chakra supplies. This seemed to have done the trick, and now she sat next to Naruto, both watching the door, eagerly awaiting the arrival of their instructor, as around them the class slowly filled with prospective students of all ages. After a few minutes, a woman walked in with deep black hair and eyes, wearing a matching kimono, and holding a small pig between her arms, crossing the small wooden floor to stand before the blackboard facing the raised seating of the classroom. "Hello everyone, I will be your instructor. My name is Shizen Kato," Shizen said, smiling around at the assembled students, her eyes falling on Naruto for a moment. "That's odd. Tsunade says that Naruto is always goofing off. I wonder why he is here then," she thought to herself as she turned her eyes away from the blonde. True, she hadn't really gotten to know the blonde boy very much, only knowing the girls due to having to help patch them up after their regular training with Tsunade, and overall being only peripherally involved with the family. "Well, let me first say welcome to your first lesson on medical program training. The Hokage and my master Tsunade have allowed me to start up this little course so we can start preparing future genin for the field if they chose to enter it after their graduation. If you all study hard and listen, I don't see why we can't have you all learning at least one jutsu before you graduate, but you better be ready to work for it," she finished with a smile as she saw all of the students looking around excitedly. The lesson went by without too much of an incident, save for one girl who had fainted when Shizen had cut her arm to demonstrate the proper way to bandage a wound, the lesson having to pause as she was carted out of class. When the lesson was over and the majority of the class had departed, Shizen noticed that a pair of students hadn't returned their equipment. Looking around for a moment, as she spotted the 2 students still sitting at the back table with one of the test dummies. As she looked, she noticed the blue and yellow hair that signified that it was Hinata and Naruto who were apparently still working on the lesson of the day. Deciding to investigate, she walked over to see that Naruto was wrapping and rewrapping the dummy's arm, with Hinata pointing out where he had gone wrong before he set to work again. As she watched, Shizen could not help but be surprised, as instead of getting angry or annoyed with Hinata's advice, or his own failure, Naruto simply smiled and proceeded to try again, attempting to follow the girl's instructions. He isn't acting at all like Tsunade described to me. He seems like a good little student," she thought to herself as Naruto finally succeeded in wrapping the arm and celebrated by hugging the poor girl beside him, who unfortunately fainted as a direct result. "I guess I'll ask Tsunade about it when I get to the hospital later," she thought as she watched Naruto panicking over the unconscious Hinata, a small smile crossing her lips as he turned back and forth before finally spotting her. "Sensei, help, Hinata's collapsed again. What do I do?" he called, looking to the black-haired woman for help. Letting out a small sigh at how clueless boys could be, Shizen moved up the steps of the classroom to stand before the pair before replying. "It's okay, Naruto, she just fainted, but set her head down carefully. She will wake up in a little while, okay?" she replied, trying to make sure she didn't laugh at the poor boy as he hurried to obey. "Okay, thanks, Sensei," replied Naruto. He hurried to sit down beside Hinata, placing her head on his legs so it wasn't resting on the floor. Shizen could only giggle at the picture they made as she left, thinking how the poor girl was likely going to faint again as soon as she realized where she had been resting. After that, Naruto and Hinata had continued to attend Shizen's lessons, becoming 2 of the top students in the class, only being outdone by Sakura. That pink-haired girl seemed to have a gift for the area and took to it like a fish to water. Meanwhile, Naruto and Hinata tended to have to put in more work, but were able to become competent enough so that as they approached their final year, both could boast at having some of the best chakra control of their grade. Thought that was not the only thing that both learned thanks to Shizen's instruction. During their final year, as the pair had once again found themselves staying after class, Hinata had noticed that Naruto was fidgeting slightly in his seat, while also glancing at her from time to time before turning back towards the front of the class, with a faint blush on his face. This confused Hinata, as it was very out of character for Naruto to not be his usual boaster's self, her mind wondering just what was happening with her blonde friend. Meanwhile, within Naruto's mind, another woman was addressing the same point, only in her usual subtle manner. Well, are you going to tell her, or are you going to simply keep acting like an Aburame stuffed your pants with their insects? Asked Jubi, looking at the scene with a huge smile on her face as Naruto continued to squirm. Hey, leave him alone, it's not that simple and you know it. Spoke the Jubi's only other source of communication, only succeeding in drawing a larger smile to the woman's lips. Yo, what he said, I mean, how do I even go and do this? She is my best friend. Asked Naruto, his worry showing just how confused he was about the matter he found himself in. You should have thought of that before you read that last chapter in that medical textbook Shizen let you and her borrow. Or at least before you asked me to explain what happens when a kunoichi and a shinobi love each other very much. Laughed Jubi, remembering how both of her listeners had gone bright red and fainted when it came to the part about male and female relations. Hey, shouted two voices, still embarrassed about that particular episode. How were we supposed to know that she was fainting because she was thinking about us? Shot Naruto. Yeah, I mean, we always just thought that she was sick or something, or suffered from fainting spells, added the other as Jubi gave both a small sigh. And the fact that she only did this whenever you two were close together or accidentally said something embarrassing didn't tip either of you off? Seedling, you need to pay attention if this slipped by you. Chuckled Jubi with an air of superiority. At this, both the two gave up and opted to continue their little fidgeting game once again as they glanced once more towards the girl sitting beside them. Soon the end of class came and Naruto found himself and Hinata heading off to one of the training fields to do a little more work before heading home for the day. Even after they arrived, Naruto had still not worked up the courage to talk to Hinata, and his nerves were so shot that while practicing with the shuriken throwing he had one sail so far over the target that it flew off into the woods bordering the training field. Finally, as they were about to leave, Jubi stepped in, and politely insisted that he ask her. Naruto, either say what you are going to say or I am going to make it so that ramen tastes like the Uchiha's hair gel for the rest of your life. Shouted the black-eyed woman, having finally lost patience waiting for the blonde to say what he came here to say. This finally prompted Naruto to speak up. Hey Hinata-chan? He called out to her as she finished throwing a kunai, turning back towards him. Yes, what it is, Naruto-kun? Asked Hinata while a blush began to form on her face. He called me Chan. Naruto called me Chan, thought the girl, smiling happily to herself as Naruto pressed on. Well, you see, I was wondering if you, what I mean is, I was wanting to know if you might, well. He managed with all the grace and poise of a drowning man. Just ask or I swear I will blow up this hollow thing you call a head right now. Shouted Jubi, knowing that if someone didn't give the kid a kick in the pants he might just blabber on all night and never get to it. Once again, she was the kick in the pants that Naruto needed. Hinata, I was wondering if you would like to go out with me sometime? Shouted Naruto as his anxiety and fear gave way, resulting in him yelling the question at her as though he was auditioning for a place as a human megaphone. Smooth move, Baka, now half the village probably heard you. Came a mocking voice from his head as Naruto froze in horror at what he had done. Meanwhile, the Jubi had fallen backwards out of her tree and was now rolling on the ground, howling with laughter at the whole situation, not being able to believe that he just shouted it at her like that. Oh my Kami, that was amazing, ha, you might as well have painted it on the Hokage monument. Managed Jubi between her laughing. Hinata, for her part, could only stare wide-eyed at Naruto, trying to process what the blonde had just said. Did Naruto-kun just ask me out on a date? No, don't faint, don't you dare faint, answer him. Oh god, he's just looking at me. Do something, you Baka, or he is going to think you aren't interested. Come on girl, move. Hinata screamed inside of her head, which resulted in a very interesting response. I'd love to. She shouted back at Naruto before clapping both hands over her mouth as she turned the same shade as Mito's hair and desperately tried to stay conscious. Yeah, oh Kami, I can't breathe, this is great. Cried Jubi in Naruto's head, even as he tried to possess what she had just yelled at him. She said yes, woho, why this is the best. Called the other member of this event as Naruto blinked across at his oldest friend. Really, Hinata-chan? Asked Naruto, quietly trying to look at the girl as a blush slowly spread across his face. Yes, Naruto-kun, I would really like to go out with you, replied Hinata, also trying to meet his gaze despite her burning face. This would have been enough, however, once both their eyes had met, each blushed so heavily that they both fell over, with huge goofy smiles on their bright red faces, giggling to themselves, the stress of the whole event finally taking its toll on them. Amidst Jubi's continued laughing, only a single phrase was audible to no one but Naruto's other silent companion. He ha 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 ha, double kill, ahh ha 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 ha, he snort. Flashback end. After their rather embarrassing start, the two had gone on their first date, and then a second until halfway through their final year they had simply decided that they were officially dating. Each had agreed to keep the matter quiet during their time at school, not wanting to be hounded during their lessons, and although either of them would admit it, both wanted to hide it from their families for a little longer for fear of either trying to separate them. A fear present more so in the blonde boy as his family's situation slowly deteriorated around him. During these past 4 years, Naruto's connection to his family had become taxed at the very best. He hadn't really talked much with his father outside of meals, and even there he didn't really have anything to say to the man. After all, what was there really to talk about with him now that he didn't seem to concern himself with Naruto's training and work in the academy? When the man wasn't working in the office, he was working with his older sisters, and as a result the conversations he had always seemed to be about them and their training. Meanwhile, the two sisters had each began to drift apart from their brother for their own reasons. Naruto had at first simply wanted to get Mito's attention from her brother, and had attempted to do so by showing off. However, when this didn't work, she also turned to belittling her brother in an attempt to prove that she was superior to him in every way. Couple this with her naturally competitive nature, and you had a recipe for disaster. Despite this, she had begun to back off slightly after a particular incident where Mito had yelled at her for being talking bad about Naruto, the whole thing devolving into a shouting match that neither had completely recovered from. Following that, she had simply taken to ignoring her brother and working to make herself stronger, while trying to mend her connection with her little sister. But most of the damage was already done, as after being hostile towards Naruto for so long she could no longer approach the boy without those old feelings pushing to the surface once again, and so as of yet her relationship with her brother was still in the garbage. Meanwhile, Minami also found herself moving away from her brother, but in her case it was more out of a fear of being angry with him. She had long ago gotten it into her head that the only reason that Naruto wasn't allowed to train with them was because of his own behavior, and that he was choosing to slack off and misbehave, not taking anything seriously, making it his fault that he was left out. As a result, what started as simple annoyance with his actions soon turned to anger, and eventually to sadness. In her mind, Naruto was going to get himself hurt, and there was nothing she could do to stop him. She assumed that her parents saw this as well and were trying to dissuade him from becoming a shinobi by not training him so that they could protect him. As a result, whenever she found herself with her brother, all she could muster was either annoyance at him, or sadness that he seemed to be ignorant to his family's efforts to protect him from a life he was ill-suited for. As a result, she wasn't able to see the true reason for any of the events surrounding her brother, and simply moved further and further from him, making her blind to the work he was putting into his dream. The final sister, Mito, however, had remained Naruto's bright light, giving him constant support, as well as love. The pair had only grew closer as the years went on, even as thanks to him she also grew closer to Hanabi, who despite what he said did enjoy the time he spent with both her and Naruto, although he would never admit to it. The boy may have been best friends with Mito, but he was still terrified of the Red Devil as he referred to her. Then was the final member of his family, and assuredly the most complicated for Naruto to sort out his feelings on. His cousin Kushina had tried to remain a clear part of his life, even with the training, yet despite her seeming efforts she too slowly distanced herself from the boy. At first it was simply just taking him out for ramen, or accompanying him with Mito to visit Hitomi while the kids ran around, small things but enough to show him just how much he still meant to her. Unfortunately, as time continued to pass, those events started to become less and less common, the spaces between their trips to the ramen stand or simple visits growing longer and longer with each passing year. The reason, sadly, was that as Kushina continued to train her daughters she found less and less time for her son. Not helping was that on top of this Naruto and Hinata were working together more and more in both their medical classes and after. Ignorant to this, what times they could have spent were slowly taken over, Kushina's ignorance of her son's life making planning such times impossible for the pair. However, what was more damaging to their relationship was the lies Kushina had begun to believe to help her manage the growing guilt she felt at drifting from her son. Kushina may have been many things, brash at times, headstrong and stubborn, but no one could call her stupid. Looking back, she could see how she had allowed her own fears to damage her relationship with her son. But she also allowed her fear of facing her failure to build into a wall of denial that cut her off from her guild, piling the reasons and false truths as a means to hold back the swirling storm of failure that was her relationship with her eldest. Recently this had been causing her more and more distress. During his last year she had begun to try and make more time for him, but the issue was that she had been away from his life for so long that she just had no idea of where to begin with him. Her only saving grace was that thankfully Naruto seemed to be willing to be patient with her, though even his willingness to accept it counted for very little as Kushina continued to hold herself back from her son. At the same time, Hinata faced her own set of family issues. It wasn't all bad, however. Her mother and her had continued to be there for her despite her limitations, and her connection to Hanabi had actually been very nice as he continued to see her as his loving older sister, who protected him from the treat of what he called the Red Devil, sometimes known as Mito. Where things started to go downhill was with her father. With Hanabi to train, he had all but left his daughter to the side of his life, leaving a gap in her family where he was concerned. On top of this, her cousin Niji had gotten into a competitive nature like his father and her own, and as a result they were less like family and more like rival sports teams, always trying to one-up each other, leaving her closest relative to be a source of constant abuse. Still, this was not the same for every one of the pair's age group. Besides each other, they had also found some company in their classmates. Sakura had been a particular surprise. It seemed once she had found her place in the medical field, the girl's confidence had skyrocketed. With this came the avoidance of the dreaded fangirl symptoms that seemed to be infecting so many of the class's girls. She had also held on to a strong friendship with Ino, who found herself in the medical class along with Sakura after a while, looking to impress her peers. They had also gotten closer to Kiba, who unlike some of the class had really taken a liking to Naruto's jokes, and found himself enjoying his time with the two friends. It also didn't help that both Mito and Hinata found Akamaru to be the greatest fluffy plushie alive. So that brought the pair to this moment on top of the Hokage monument, looking down at the village below as the first vestiges of light began to crest the horizon. "Naruto-kun, are you sure about this?" asked a blushing Hinata as she looked nervously behind her to where a massive tarp lay wrapped up. "Well, Hinata-chan, a good friend of mine suggested the method, and you did say you wanted to tell everyone about us," smiled back Naruto while pulling out a kunai and walking back towards a rope that was staked to the ground. But Naruto, I am not sure this is a good idea," continued Hinata, allowing her stutter to return momentarily in face of this coming event. "It's okay, Hinata-chan, no matter what happens we'll be okay. Now watch this, it's going to be great," smiled Naruto as he sliced through the rope behind him with a dazzling smile upon his face. With a flutter of canvas and a small shifting of robes, a banner descended over the Hokage's faces, rolling halfway down the mountain as it went, obscuring the stone faces' eyes. The first to notice the movement were the sentries on the outer walls of the village, as the flutter of white had grabbed their attention. The reaction from them was different depending on the individual. While several were simply stunned at the message now facing them, along with the idea that it had apparently been so easily slipped past all of them, left several momentarily stupefied. Others, particularly from the female demographic, were giggling to themselves, thinking how cute the whole event was, while a few of their male coworkers could only nod their heads in approval at the display. Those who noticed next were the shinobi and kunoichi, along with the students who were about to leave for class as they exited their homes, or spied it from their windows. Most fell into the same groups as their ladders, however, there were a few exceptions. "Oh my God!" shouted a pink-haired girl as she spotted the banner from her bedroom window before falling into a fit of excited giggles at what the banner spelled out. "There's no way, how did I not see this coming?" called the blonde girl as she exited her front door, dropping her lunch as her eyes traveled over the banner, allowing her mouth to sound out the words. From the Hyuga resident, 3 sets of Byakugan sat above 3 separate expressions. Hitomi was smiling ear to ear, while she clapped her hands together in front of her mouth, trying to stop her excited giggling. Hanabi was torn on what to think, finally settling for a simple smile, being happy for his older sister, as he traced the message before him. Hayashi, however, had a look on his face as though he had just seen his entire home burnt down. Equal amounts of horror and anger crossed the man's face as killing intent began to leak off of him. Over at the Namikaze's residence, one little redhead was excitedly clapping her hands as she looked out her window at her brother's most recent action. Even as behind her the remainder of her family were undergoing very different reactions. Minato was livid, his mind already racing as he glared towards his son's latest prank. How could he do that to the Hokage monument? Didn't he realize that he was desecrating a village monument? On top of that, how could he not tell him about what was written up there before telling the whole fucking village? And what did he mean by Uzumaki? Thought the blonde as he continued to glare at the hanging message. Minami and Naruto were simply in shock, their eyes tracing back over the sign as it hung down over the village, not knowing what to think. A part of them was both happy for their brother, but also jealous/angry at him for creating this whole event. But most of all, they felt confusion at the one point of the banner Uzumaki. They both thought, wondering just what their brother meant by the change. Kushina, however, was where the real reaction was found. She simply stood there as if frozen in place as she read the banner. Guilt, happiness, sadness, anger, worry, and a small twinge of fear all fought for possession of the poor woman's face as her violet eyes continued to dart back and forth across the banner, causing her to look as though she was having a small fit of some kind. As her eyes passed from left to right, she found herself reading the words once again, as if trying to believe that they were real. Naruto Uzumaki, luckiest guy in Konoha, is dating Hinata Hyuga, the most beautiful girl in the world. The banner read in bright orange letters as it swayed in the morning breeze for all to see. Several questions came to her mind as she read the banner for the second time. How did I miss my own son being with Hinata, she thought to herself. Oh, how could I miss something so big as this? Why didn't I see it coming? Thought the woman as her racing mind began at last to slow enough for other thought begin inching across her consciousness. Wait, how could he not tell me? Have I really pushed him that far away from me? Wait, what am I thinking? My Sochi has his first girlfriend, oh, and it's Hinata. Oh, Kami, they will be so cute together. Oh, I wonder if Hitomi is seeing this. Yo, I wonder how Hayashi is taking this. Thought the redhead in rapid succession. Her thoughts finally came to rest on one particular part of the banner that suddenly became the complete focus of her attention. Why does it say Naruto Uzumaki instead of Namikaze? Is he trying to say something to us, but what would leaving out only the Namikaze part of his name? Wondered Kushina. And with those final thoughts she turned to see her family's reaction to the banner. As she looked around she saw the questioning and in the case of her husband furious reactions to the pronouncement. Mito was still clapping away at the window, and her two daughters were looking between their Kasen and Tusan as if expecting them to explain what was going on. Minato, Kushina began, but before she could get any farther she was interrupted by her husband. Kushina, take care of the girls, I have to go take care of our son, stated Minato in a voice of forced calm as he departed in a familiar yellow flash, leaving Kushina to turn towards her daughters who still looked slightly dazed. Girls, did you know about Naruto and Hinata being together? Questioned Kushina to the pair as each met her violet eyes pausing themselves before replying. I didn't, Kasen, but I really don't spend much time with Onaikan anymore, replied Naruko, looking a little ashamed as she said it, which did not go unnoticed by Kushina. No, Kasen, I don't really have time to worry about Onaikan's stunts, though I know he does stay after class with Hinata to go to that course on medical jutsu with Aunt Shizen. I guess he just went to spend time with Hinata, answered Minami as she began to answer her own questions in the same manner that had led her to move so far from her brother. Wait, how long has he been going to these lessons? Asked Kushina, wondering why she hadn't heard about any of this before. Pausing for a moment, Minami considered the question before replying. Not sure, I think it was during our second year sometime. You would have to ask Shizen, Minami answered back as Kushina nodded slightly to herself. Yeah, I guess I should anyway. You girls get ready for school. Mito, come on, we are going to go and visit your godmother for a bit, called Kushina as she turned to find her youngest still happily clapping at the window. Meanwhile, across town within the Senju complex, Shizen at that very moment was smiling to herself as she looked at the banner hanging above the Hokage's faces. Well, it's about time those two finally told everyone, she chuckled to herself. Being their teacher for the past few years, it was pretty obvious to her that the two were either dating or so close to doing so it hardly mattered. Meanwhile, Tsunade was simply laughing at the whole thing, while banging her fist on the windowsill trying to catch her breath as she looked from the banner to Shizen,